All right. Hello, everyone, again to the Voice of Life. I'm Christoph Kennedy, your host, for another part of our read through of the book of Job in the Study Bible ESV version of the Bible. Okay, if you've been with me in the last two parts, you've been seeing that, especially if you haven't read through Job before, or if you have, maybe you're getting another perspective with me here. You're seeing that Job he's in the thick of it right now, battling his friends over how righteous or upright his life really is or is not. From his friend's perspective, Job is wicked, and the deeper we're getting into this three versus one, this 3v1 battle, his friends are digging their toes deeper and deeper into the sand. If anything, he used to just be, well, Job, maybe you have some issues. Now their friends are full blown like, no, you're awful. Your whole life, you're just an awful person. Like we're starting to see their pride of needing to be right is battling Job's defense of his righteousness, right? And the more and the stronger that we see his friends attack Job, we're starting to see Job's questioning and directiveness towards God is becoming harsher as well. So we're seeing the influence of Job's friends on Job's life. But we have a lot to read. I would like to get the verses or chapters 22 to 37. The first live, I thought I was going to get through the whole book. I'm starting to see how ridiculous that was, especially having the study Bible, the ESV study Bible version. There's a lot of extra content, which as I'm reading, I'll be able to say, I'm reading the extra content. I'll give a declaration of that, and I'll let you know when I'm reading extra content versus not. But yeah, Job has been very insightful to me. So especially if you're somebody who's questioning God, going through a struggle, dealing with you know struggles and conflicts of faith when it comes to God, Job is very good when it comes to that. It's eye opening, if you will. So okay, let's continue. So yeah, if you're ready, grab your plate, grab your utensils, your highlighter, your pen. We jumping right back into it. Chapter 22. All right. Now we've had a couple rounds already of Job's friends Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar attack Job, and Job going back. We have two rounds of that. Now we're on round three. All right. Round three, the last round of this 3v1. So let's get into it. Chapter 22. Okay, the third cycle. The extra content. Third cycle. The consistent pattern of the first two cycles unravels in the last dialogue. Eliphaz begins by depicting Job's life as a constant stream of wicked activity. Right now, it's constant. That wasn't the talk at the beginning, but now he has this constant stream of wickedness. Okay. In contrast to the perception Job offered in his first speech, Job's reply, chapters 23 to 24, strongly implies that the divine power that has touched him is typically capricious and destructive. Bildad offers the beginning of a reply before Job's interrupts with a further assertion of the impenetrable mystery of divine power. No room appears in the cycle for a contribution from Zophar, which is great because if you've been here, if you know about Job's story, Zophar is that one friend. He just goes off the deep end every single time he speaks. Like he holds nothing back. He's brutal about it. So maybe it's good that we don't need to hear nothing from him. We know where he's at. If there was any comfort in friends attending to Job, it has entirely evaporated. So all the comfort from his friends at this point is completely gone. The two parties have argued themselves increasingly apart, revising earlier judgments as they do so. All right. So revising earlier things that they said, they pretty much are just again stripping away any sort of kindness behind them. So further extra content, chapter 22, verses 1 through 30. All right, so this is going to be Eliphaz speaking in this third cycle, this third bout, this third round. In his final speech, Launching the uniquely shaped third cycle, Eliphaz revisits earlier themes with renewed fervor and finality. He questions whether Job has any basis to lament before God. Asserts again that Job's circumstances reveals his abundant evil. Abundant. So now he's full of evil. Sheesh. Compares Job's words to those of the wicked and calls him once more to repent so that he might find his ways established by God. Now, Eliphaz, again, in the first read through, Eliphaz was the one who, he'd butter up his words first. He started talking to you nicer and then kind of lay out where he felt like you had some issues. He was that friend. Again, but now we're at a point where he's like, nah, it's straight fire. Every friend now is just giving straight fire. So let's see what that fire is about. Chapter 22. Eliphaz speaks, Job's wickedness is great. Then Eliphaz the Temanite answered and said, can a man be profitable to God? Surely he who is wise is profitable to himself. Is it any pleasure to the Almighty if you are in the right? Or is it gain to him if you make your ways blameless? Wow. So now they're even questioning Job's blamelessness, which is even something that God mentioned Job was, that he was blameless. So, in my opinion, I don't think Eliphaz is right to say things like this. Is it any pleasure to the Almighty if you are in the right, or is it gain to him if you make your ways blameless? Chapter or verse 4. Is it for your fear of him that he reproves you and enters into judgment with you? Is not your evil abundant? There is no end to your iniquities. Sheesh. And I'm curious as well if these friends are ever going to make any proof of what they're saying. They're basing all that what they're saying, they're basing it off of Job's suffering, which is him losing his kids and losing all his wealth. But they're not bringing up any specific thing that Job has done. So there's a lot of assumption. There's a lot of pride in what they're saying right now. There is no end to your iniquities. Verse 6. For you have exacted pledges of your brothers for nothing, and stripped the naked of their clothing. You have given no water to the weary to drink, and you have withheld bread from the hungry. So he said, you haven't given anything to the poor. The man with power possessed the land, and the favored man lived in it. You have sent widows away empty, and the arms of the fatherless were crushed. Therefore snares are all around you, and sudden terror overwhelms you, or darkness so that you cannot see, and a flood of water covers you. So he's saying the Spirit of God is covering over you, right? The flood of water is referred to is the Spirit, right? Also, to make a note too, these friends never give any account of them doing any of these things. Not that it has to be necessary, but it goes to, like what Jesus said, he will be saying in the New Testament later in the Bible. Those who have not sinned, may you cast the first stone. You could even, and also when it comes to judging, judge or do not judge lest ye be judged. It doesn't mean, because it's interpreted wrong a lot of times, it doesn't mean we should not judge. But if you're going to judge less in fear of, or do not judge less, which means in fear of, do not judge in fear of that you will also be judged by the same standards in which you judge. That's the full interpretation and understanding of that. So if you're going to judge, which is not saying it's a sin to judge, just know that you'll be judged to the same standards that you are also judging. So these friends, or Eliphaz, saying you haven't given to the poor, you let widows walk away empty from you, you've crushed the fatherless, right? There's snares all around you. All these things that you haven't done and how your life is living now. I hope Eliphaz is living this way, because if he's judging Job but not doing himself, God will judge him for that. Okay. So essentially, it's one thing to not do something and just continue living. But when you judge others for not doing something and you yourself have also not been doing these things, you'll be judged harsher for that, more harshly. Right? Verse 12. Is not God high in the heavens? See the highest stars, how lofty they are. But you say, what does God know? Can he judge through the deep darkness? Thick clouds veil him so that he does not see, and he walks on the vault of heaven. Will you keep to the old way that wicked men have trod? Harsh words. Out of context, this is great. Great stuff. Great conviction. Out of context. Verse 16, they are snatched away before their time. Their foundation was washed away. They said to God, depart from us. And what can the Almighty do to us? Yet he filled their houses with good things, but the counsel of the wicked is far from me. Hmm. You have all this wealth, yet he filled his house with good things, all these wealthy things, money, luxuries, and all these things. But the counsel of the wicked is far from me. Counsel of the wicked is far from me. Okay. The righteous see it and are glad. The innocent ones mocks at them, saying, surely our adversaries are cut off, and what they left, the fire has consumed. Whew, a lot was being said here. So let's get some extra content on here because Eliphaz this third round, he's coming out with just straight fire. Straight fire. So chapter 22, verses 2 to 4. Eliphaz opens his response with the three rhetorical questions that ask Job whether it makes any sense that God would bring suffering on one who is wise, blameless, or fears him. Eliphaz argues that since wisdom is profitable for the person and not somehow profitable for God, there could be no purpose for suffering other than to indicate judgment and a need to repent. Right? And to this specific point, one can see that being true. It doesn't also have to mean that's the only reason why people may suffer. Right? It doesn't mean you only suffer because of judgment. That doesn't have to be the case with God. It's never said that the only reason why people suffer is because of some harsh judgment or be due to disobedience. Right? There's also a thing called free will. Right? There's also an entity known as the devil. There's also these two different reasons why people can suffer. Somebody enacting their free will on you that maliciously affects you, or the devil, being the devil, wants to destroy you, which is more the case of Job's story. Anyways, continuing. In framing his response this way, Eliphaz inverts Job's own earlier reasoning that any sin of his could be of no consequence to so great a God. He also continues to assert that Job's circumstances on earth are transparent and exhaustive indicators that can and ought to be read only as signs of God's judgment. Verses 5 through 11. Eliphaz assumes that Job's circumstances reveal significant evil in his life, and thus he feels justified in describing the likely ways that Job has sinned. Verse 6. Eliphaz's first accusation evokes the law that a person should not take someone else's life necessities to secure debt, like a cloak, right? Or a mill or millstone used to grind grain for food. Okay. Verse 9, in his description of Job's presumed mistreatment of widows and the fatherless, presumed, right? Assuming mistreatment of widows and the fatherless. Eliphaz speaks in terms similar to the warnings in the law against such practices and to prophetic oracles of judgment, all seen in Exodus, Deuteronomy, Isaiah, or Ezekiel. Verse 13, in response to Job's continued insistence that the wicked prosper on earth and that his circumstances are not the consequences of sin, Eliphaz asserts that Job is guilty of implying that God is so high that he is unable to know or judge life on earth. All right, but that's not what Job is saying. A question similar to the one that Eliphaz puts in Job's mouth here, what does God know, is used of the wicked in Psalm 73:11. but it comes amid a lament over their prosperity and safety that is itself similar to Job's complaint. Eliphaz wrongly equates Job's attitude towards God with that of the wicked. Again, his pride, Eliphaz's pride, is leading him to just falsely accuse Job, and then falsely equate what Job is saying and how his life is being run right now. And it's all pride. We're starting to see. Don't let pride rule you. Verse 17 to 18. In these verses, Eliphaz essentially quotes some of Job's words from 21, chapter 21, 14 and 16. However, where Job was arguing that the wicked prosper in spite of open rebellion, Eliphaz is asserting that their prosperity and rebellion are momentary and that the wicked are snatched away before their time. Which, again, out of context, is true, because at the end of the day, even the wicked who prosper in life, when their judgment comes, it will be harsh. Thus, when Job said, "The counsel of the wicked is far from me," in order to distance himself from the rebellion and practices of which his friends accused him, Eliphaz uses the same words to cast Job's position on these matters as itself the counsel of the wicked. Continuing to the next page. All right, continuing. Agree with God and be at peace, thereby good will come to you. Out of context, that's a bar. Agree with God and be at peace. 22. Receive instruction from his mouth and lay up his words in your heart. If you return to the Almighty, you will be built up. If you remove injustice far from your tents, if you lay gold in the dust and gold of Ophir among the stones of the torrent bed, then the Almighty will be your gold and your precious silver. For then you will delight yourself in the Almighty and lift up your face to God. You make your prayer to him, and he will hear you, and you will pay your vows. You will decide on a matter, and it will be established for you, and light will shine on your ways. For when you are humbled, you say, "It is because of pride." But he says the lowly. But he saves the lowly. Sorry. For when they are humbled, you say, "It is because of pride." But he saves the lowly. He delivers even the one who is not innocent, and who will be delivered through the cleanness of your hands. All right, so he ends with some great stuff. Again, out of context, these great things. He delivers even the one who is not innocent, who will be delivered through the cleanness of your hands. Receive instruction from his mouth and lay up his words in your heart. All right. When you do these things, for then you would delight yourself in the Almighty and lift up your face to God. So he's saying wise things because what is said is wise. What is being said are wise things. But there's a difference between knowing wise things, like knowing what to say that sounds wise, and moving in wisdom. If Eliphaz would have been moving in wisdom, he wouldn't have been saying all these things. He would be trying to understand. Wisdom shows you that when you're entering a situation, you want to understand it first, right? That's why consistently, it says in Matthew, consistently, you have to seek first the kingdom of God. If his friends would have sought first the kingdom of God, as in sought wisdom first, before putting their judgment on Job as if it's their job, right? To lay down such harsh judgment. I mean, we all judge situations, but this continuous badgering of their friend, this is not their job. They're stepping too far past what they're supposed to be doing, right? They moved past seeking and started laying down their interpretations and their judgment, right? Forecasting their weather upon Job, and it's not their job. Okay, and just to get some background information in the last couple of verses here, before Job replies. 21. Implicit in the plea for Job to agree with God is Eliphaz's presumption that his interpretation of Job's circumstances is equivalent to God's. Right. Again, yeah, exactly. His interpretation. He's making it seem like it's his job. Let God put down his interpretation of what's happening. Right? In particular, it seems Eliphaz thinks his argument in verses 17 to 18 should be a compelling enough reason for Job to relent and finally agree that his suffering is rooted in his wickedness. Unfortunately for Eliphaz, Job puts his full faith and trust in God, not man. Verse 30. This verse is another instance of unintended irony in the words of the friends. Eliphaz is suggesting that Job's repentance would lead to his being able to intercede and bring deliverance even for one who is not innocent. What Eliphaz does not know is that he stands in need of the very deliverance he describes, and that it will in fact come through Job's intercession on his behalf. Right? Like Eliphaz, you need what you're administering. You need to take the same medicine that you're trying to give to Job, right? That you're administering to Job. You need to take a dose of your medicine, right? Whew. All right, pressing on. Chapter 23, Job's response, right? Job, God is hidden. Job is tired of arguing his case before his friends, which is revealed in part by the way he largely ignores the content of Eliphaz's most recent response. I understand. Instead, he expresses his longing to be able to come before God directly because Job trusts that his ways are truly known and would be vindicated by God. In the second part of the speech, Job laments that judgment does not appear to come more evidently on those who oppress the needy for their own gain. I understand him. He's ignoring. He's like, look, I tried with y'all for the last two rounds. Y'all still don't get it. I hear what y'all saying, but you guys are out of turn. You're out of pocket. So at a point, you gotta just ignore it. It's like, okay. I mean, have we been there? Have we been there where we're trying to plead our case to people close to us, but their interpretation is so far off than what you fully understand is being communicated? You understand you're in a place of duress, of struggle, and not even turning away that, hey, it might be my fault. I feel like I was right, but who knows? It might be my fault. But your friends are so off in their interpretation because they're focused again on their interpretation and not letting God be God. Let's get into it. Chapter 23, Job replies, "Where is God?" Then Job answered and said, "Today also my complaint is bitter. My hand is heavy on account of my groaning." Hmm. My complaint is bitter. My hand is heavy on account of my groaning. Right, I'm getting tired. I've complained and grieved so much. I'm tired. Oh, that I knew where I might find him, that I might come even to his seat. I would lay my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments. How many of us ask that? Like, where's God that I can talk to him? Right. This is Job seeking God directly. I mean, how many of us have been there when we're struggling? Or like, God, make it make sense. Tell me now. Like what's going on? Why am I going through all this? Right. Verse 5. I would know what he would answer me and understand what he would say to me. We'll highlight that too. Verse 5. I would know what he would answer me and understand what he would say to me. Because if he told me directly, then I would understand, right? That's what he's saying. Verse 6. Would he contend with me in the greatness of his power? No, he would pay attention to me. There, an upright man could argue with him, and I would be acquitted forever by my judge. Whew. He would pay attention to me. This is Job speaking of for God and speaking about the love that God has. He wouldn't just ignore me. He would pay attention to me. He would listen to me. God wants us to talk to him. Job knows that. Verse 8, behold, I go forward, but he is not there, and backward, but I do not perceive him. On the left hand, when he is working, I do not behold him. He turns to the right hand, but I do not see him. 10, but he knows the way that I take. When he has tried me, I shall come out as gold. But he knows the way that I take. When he has tried me, I shall come out as gold. Job is saying that he knows right now he's going through a trial. He's being put through that refiner's fire. And only God knows where I'm heading. He knows where I'm going. Through all this, Job is understanding that I'm being put through a test. And should I stay committed, I will be refined by that test. I will be renewed. I'll be restored. I'll be emboldened in gold. As in, I'll be made rich. I'll be made luxurious in God's sight. Not to man, not with precious things, but I will be made wealthy in God's sight. 11. My foot has held fast to his steps. I have kept his way and have not turned aside. I have not departed from the commandment of his lips. I have treasured the words of his mouth more than my portion of food. I've kept his ways, Job says. I'm going to bracket verse 10 to 12 here. I have kept his way. Excuse me. Chapter 13. But he is unchangeable. And who can turn him back? What he desires, that he does. He's unchangeable, and that should give hope. Excuse me. Sorry, I've been dealing with phlegm and illness for a couple months. Job's come clutch for me because I've been dealing with some bodily health issues. In a way, I'm here in Houston. I grew up in Vegas, but I'm here in Houston. Got back here in April 2025, so I'm still within my first year of being here. And it's my first winter experience in Houston. Also, I started a new job as a teacher. So this winter, I've been hit with so many different illnesses, from headaches to phlegm to coughing to sore throat. So many things I generally don't deal with. I don't really get sick like that, right? Allergies here and there from dust, but I got sick in ways this winter that I usually am not sick with, and consecutively, right? But also with the job of teaching and dealing with kids, especially on the elementary level, is bringing so many different tests, and not just with the kids, but now I'm seeing like with staff as well. So when it comes to trials, I'm definitely getting put through it in a way. Not at the same level as Job, but it's not about the same level. It's not a contest of who's struggling the most. It's what are you doing through that struggle, right? If anything, reading through Job and reading what he's going through and how he's still standing amidst of what he's going through, and me feeling like it's more of a trial than me just being sick. It's hopeful. It's inspiring. 14. For he will complete what he appoints for me, and many such things are in his mind. Therefore, I am terrified at his presence. Let me put that again. Let me highlight that. Verse 14. For he will complete what he appoints for me, and many such things are in his mind. Right? He's going to complete whatever he has appointed for me. He will make it so. And he has many such things. So there's many things that he has for me to do. Therefore, I am terrified at his presence. When I consider, verse 15, therefore I'm terrified at his presence. When I consider, I am in dread of him. God has made my heart faint, and the Almighty has terrified me. Yet I am not silenced because of the darkness, nor because thick darkness covers my face. I'm terrified, yet I'm not silenced. I'm terrified because I understand his awesome power. I understand what he can do for me, to me, and through me, though. is that through me, which is why I'm not silent, which is why I am brave and I still stand, though terrified. That is courage. God gives me courage at the end of the day. It's an encouraging thought. All right, so let's get some context before we jump into verse 24. Start at 23. 23, verse 2. Verse 2. Extra content. The opening phrase of Job's response is probably directed at his friends more than at God. When he begins with, today also, right? Today also my complaint is bitter. That's what I was thinking too. Job is implying that after all the dialogue with his friends, that they have neither attended to him well nor persuaded him of his guilt. My hand is heavy. Although it is not typically stated in this manner, the images of the hand being strengthened or failing or falling are used in the OT to refer respectively to a person being either encouraged or discouraged. Probably more so in this case, discouraged because of the battering of his friends. 3 to 7, verses 3 to 7. The last time Job used this kind of legal language, he was convinced that God would both ignore and condemn him. Here, his convictions are just the opposite. If Job were granted an audience, God would pay attention and Job would be acquitted. He understands where he stands with God, but he still wants to hear from him directly in case there's anything else, right? Verses 10 through 12. In his wish to present a case before God, Job refers to the manner of his life in vocabulary typical of the wisdom literature. He trusts that God knows the way that he has walked. Job has preserved in God's steps. He's not turned aside from his way, and he has valued God's commandment and the words of his mouth more than provision for his own physical well-being. Despite what I'm going through, I still walk in his way because I understand his ways are just and righteous. And being the creator of all, he knows better than I do, right? Again, there has to be a point to all this. There has to be a refining to all this. 13 to 17. Although he has carefully considered his way, verses 10 to 12, Job believes it is ultimately God who will bring about his purposes through what he appoints. Right? Consequently, Job confesses that he is terrified at the thought of God's presence. Still, even in the darkness of not being able to understand his path or God's purposes fully, he's compelled to continue his lament. Yet I'm not sad, or I'm not silenced. Right? But this is what God wants, though. He wants us as his people to reach out to him, to talk to him. Right? This is what God wants. He wants us to speak with him. Okay. Chapter 24, moving on. So this is going to be from 1 to 25. Job is going to be continuing here. Extra content here. Job has persisted in arguing against his friend's assertion that the wicked are judged transparently and immediately on earth, but he also clings to the belief in the justice of God as the ground for his lament and a hope for vindication. In this part of his speech, Job wishes that God's governing of the world would be more apparent. He offers a further description of the acts of the wicked, the consequences of their victims, the seeming blindness of his friends to his reality, and the lack of any apparent judgment. Job does not address God in this response, nor does he seem necessarily to be responding directly to his friends as much as he is speaking exhaustedly in their presence. So he's just speaking out. It's not for anybody really. It's just I'm venting. So I'm full of steam. And I just need to let it out. Verse 24 or chapter 24. Why are not times of judgment kept by the Almighty? And why do those who know him never see his days? Some move landmarks. They seize flocks and pasture them. They drive away the donkey of the fatherless. They take the widow's ox for a pledge. Let me highlight those. Let me bracket that verse 1 there, those questions. Right. Verse 4. They thrust the poor off the road. The poor of the earth all hide themselves. Behold, the wild donkeys in the desert, the poor go out to their toil, seeking game. The wasteland yields food for their children. Behold, the wild donkeys in the desert. The poor go out to their toil seeking gain, seeking wealth, right? Verse 6. They gather their fodder in the field, and they glean the vineyard of the wicked man. They lie all night naked, without clothing, and have no covering in the cold. They are wet with the rain of the mountains, and cling to the rock for the lack of shelter. Verse 9. There are those who snatch the fatherless child from their breast, and they take a pledge against the poor. I've never seen the days. So he's pretty much saying in this chapter, why aren't those who are actually wicked, who do evil things, why do they not see judgment? Why is God's judgment kept from these type of people? But those who know him, who see him, right? Or why do those who know him, right? Those who know God, why don't they see him, right? Job is, I think in this sense, referring to himself like, I know God. So God, why are you not making yourself known to me? But the wicked, they can just live freely. And that's been a lot of Job's statements. All right. And why are they kept away? Before we turn the page here, let's get some extra content. Extra clarity, if you will. 24 verse 1. Job asks a question that represents two perspectives. Why is it that the wicked do not seem to experience times of judgment, right? And that the righteous never see his days? The day of the Lord is a common phrase in the OT that refers to the coming judgment of the Lord on the nations, but also represents the full revealing of God's glory and the restored beauty of his people. A day of the Lord is an occasion on which God the Almighty shows his hand. Right? Verses 2 to 12. One breakdown, and then it's going to break down further. Job's description of the injustice of the wicked, verses 2 to 4, and the effects of their victims, verses 5 to 12, appears to emphasize the severity and visibility of these things, which ought to be evident to observers on earth as well as to God. The conclusion of verse 12, that God ignores these evils, is precisely opposite the conclusion drawn in a passage with similar concerns in Lamentations 3, 31 to 36. Verse 9. There are those who snatch the father's child from the breast. That verse. Some interpreters have suggested that the Hebrew word translated against in the second line should be understood as child. Right? Right. With the sense they take the child of the poor as a pledge, because it would be more consistent with the focus of the fatherless child in the first line. However, the translation against does not exclude the possibility that the second line may refer to a child being taken as a pledge. Neither does it require it as the sole referent. Still, verse 3 and verses 10 through 12 seem to suggest that what was taken in pledge was the means by which the poor family could have been clothed and fed, which of course would be equivalent in its effects to taking a child from the nursing mother. All right, so pretty much just talking about all things that poor people do in order to pay for their life. All right. Moving on, verse 10. They go about naked without clothing, hungry, they carry the sheaves. Among the olive rows of the wicked they make oil, and tread the wine presses, but suffer thirst. From out of the city the dying groan, and the soul of the wounded cries for help. Yet God charges no one with wrong. 13. There are those who rebel against the light, who are not acquainted with his ways, and do not stay in its paths. The murderer rises before it is light. The murderer rises before it is light, that he may kill the poor and needy, and in the night he is like a thief. I just want to highlight verse 13 where it says, there are those who rebel against the light, who are not acquainted in its ways. Sometimes I highlight verses like that to be reminded of what not to be. Verse 15. The eye of the adulterer also waits for the twilight, saying, "No eye will see me," for nighttime. That's when usually most of your adulterous works or adulterous ways work, at night. And he veils his face. 16. In the dark they dig through houses. By day they shut themselves up. They do not know the light. For deep darkness is morning to all of them. For they are friends with the terrors of deep darkness. 18. You say, "Swift are they on the face of the waters. Their portion is cursed in the land. No trader turns toward their vineyards. Drought and heat snatch away the snow waters. So does Sheol those who have sinned." Sheol again being hell. The womb forgets them. The worm finds them sweet. They are no longer remembered. So wickedness is broken like a tree. 21. They wrong the barren, childless women, and do no good to the widow. Yet God prolongs the life of the mighty by his power. They rise up when they despair of life. He gives them security, and they are supported, and his eyes are upon their ways. They are exalted a little while, and then are gone. They are brought low and gathered up like all others. They are cut off like the heads of grain. If it is not so, who will prove me a liar and show that there is nothing in what I say? Mm. Job saying some tough things. Let's get some context here. Going back to 13 through 17. These verses are linked together by a play on the senses of the word light and its related vocabulary. Job begins by describing those who rebel against the light as those who oppose wisdom and righteousness, not knowing his ways or walking in his paths. Yes. The light, obviously being what God created in the very beginning, the light being truth. Job then describes how this manner of life is revealed in the light of day and the dark night. The murderer gets up before it is light to pursue injustice and continues to prowl around at night. The adulterer assumes that in the twilight his actions will go unseen. Thus, they each bring ruinous effects on their households at night, while seeking to guard themselves during the day. And that's interesting. While they seek to guard themselves during the day, it's interesting how that's worded, right? At night is when they commit their atrocities, but during the daytime they try to cover themselves up, because it's almost as if the light of the day, the light exposes them, and they try to hide from the light because of what they've done in the dark. But what's done in the dark, we know how that goes. Job implies that the reversal of the typical times of sleep and labor, deep darkness, has become morning, is itself a manifestation of the fact that they do not know the light, and instead they have chosen foolishly to become friends with the terrors of the deep darkness. Right? They do all their awful work during the night when they think they're not being seen. It's never the case with God. Verses 18 to 20. The function of these three verses in Job's speech is difficult to determine. 18 to 20. You say, "Swift are they on the face of the waters, their portion is cursed in the land. No trader turns toward their vineyards." Right? Those lines. The statement seemed to be more consistent with the viewpoint of the friends than of Job. It is for this reason that verse 18 begins with "you say," which is not explicit in the Hebrew but is inferred from the content and possible purpose of these verses. If this is Job's purpose, then he is once again restating the type of assertions that his friends have made. He does so to show that such statements seem to willfully ignore the actual state of affairs on earth. Another possible interpretation is to take the statements following 24:18a as Job's description of what he wishes would come to pass. Example, "Let the portion be cursed in the land." If Job's intention is to express the wish that judgment would be more apparent, then he has possibly taken up the theme of the questions that opened this section. Verse 18, further context. Swift are they on the face of the waters, may represent a saying or idiom from the time of the writing, but the referent and meaning of the phrase are not clear. And maybe that swift refers to the fleeting life of the wicked, either described by the friends or desired by Job. Swift are they on the face of the waters. You say, swift are they on the face of the waters. Their portion is cursed on the land. I might look at that one deeper later. Okay. Now, verse 21. Job focuses on the barren, childless woman, and the widow to recast once again the truth embedded within his friend's accusations. The care of widows, orphans, and sojourners is a central theme in the instruction of the law in either Exodus 22 and Deuteronomy 24. Such care is to be both a priority of faithfulness on the part of God's people, and if injustice in these areas went unaddressed, an indicator that Israel had forgotten her own history, even though injustice in these areas is supposed to be what God desires. The obvious existence of injustice seems unhindered by any sign of judgment. If what Job's friends assert to be true true has any merit, judgment ought to be evident on those who exploit wisdom or exploit widows to their own gain. Right? So he's saying, like, you guys are saying that I'm doing all these things, but if that was true, what about the people who actually do them and they receive no judgment or receive no judgment? Is what he's assuming, right? There's that. All right. Now we're going to get into Bildad. This is going to speak for a little bit, but again, before getting cut off by Job. Verse 25, 1 through 6. Extra content. Bildad. An unanswered question. Bildad's words represent the final speech of the three friends. The final speech of the three friends. By returning to the central question from Eliphaz's initial response, Bildad reveals the dilemma within which the friends have constrained themselves and the postures they have embodied towards God and Job as a result. Bildad reveals the dilemma within which the friends have constrained themselves and the posture they have embodied toward God. So they're posturing up towards God. They're in for a reckoning. These friends, they're in for a reckoning. It's coming up. Since the friends have argued their theological understanding and application as representing God's perspective, they have consistently thought of the choice before them as being that either God or Job must be in the wrong. Well, definitely ain't God, so that's what they're saying. Ooh. On account of Job's suffering and their own confidence about being able to interpret it, the friends have never really brought their own viewpoint under scrutiny. They have never brought their own viewpoint under scrutiny or given thought to the possibility that they may be wrong in both their defense of God and their pursuit of Job. And when they say their defense of God, they're saying that the defense of God harshly judging Job because of his wickedness. That's their viewpoint. So they're defending the fact that they believe God is judging Job because of his wickedness. And they are strong in that, and they feel like that what they're interpreting is true. But they can't see the reason at all that they might be wrong in that. Again, their pride. All right. Chapter 25, a quick chapter. Bildad speaks, man cannot be righteous. Then Bildad the Shahite, answered and said, dominion and fear are with God. He makes peace in his high heaven. Again, out of context, it's a great verse. Dominion and fear are with God. He makes peace in his high heaven. That's a great verse. It's a good highlight. Verse 3. Is there any number to his armies? Upon whom does his light not arise? How then can man be in the right before God? How can he who is born of woman be pure? Behold, even the moon is not bright, and the stars are not pure in his eyes. How much less man who is a maggot, and the son of man who is a worm? right? So quickly going to verse 4, extra content. How then can man be in the right before God? This question is repeated several times throughout the dialogue between Job and his friends in slightly different forms. It is asked originally by Eliphaz, recast and reused by Job in his second speech, repeated and reinforced by Eliphaz, and returned to again here by Bildad in the final speech of the friends. Okay, moving on, chapter 26, which will be verses 1, or before that, chapter 26 through chapter 31. Job, the power of God, place of wisdom, and the path of integrity. Okay. So in this part, the dialogue between Job and his three friends has a pattern in which each speech by Job is followed by responses from the friends in a particular order: Eliphaz, Bildad, and then Zophar. After two cycles of this dialogue, it appears that Job is tired of the repetitive and relentless nature of his friends' responses. He signals the end of the dialogue by cutting Bildad's third response short and precluding any third speech from Zophar. Job concludes with a lengthy monologue in which he takes up several subjects related particularly to the theme of what is hidden and what is revealed. The friends' presumed knowledge does not necessarily promote justice nor take into consideration the extent of the mystery of God's ways. Job cannot agree that his suffering reveals wickedness, and he wishes that those who oppose him would be like the wicked when they are finally cut off. Ooh. As in, depart from me, demon. Job describes the value, mystery, and place of wisdom. Job also longs for the past, laments the present, and finishes with a plea that the character of his life would be revealed for what it is, and judged accordingly. Given the perceived tensions with Job's early statements and on the wicked in chapter 27, and the apparently independent status of the wisdom hymn in chapter 28, some argue that voices other than Job's should be heard speaking these passages. On the other hand, it is possible to follow the text as it is. After all, 31:40 says, "The words of Job's are ended," which seems to clearly attribute these speeches to Job. These questions are taken up in context below. Whew. Yeah, Job he about to be saying a lot. He's like, you know what? I'm tired of y'all talking. Now I'm ranting. Now y'all gonna listen. Look at me. I'm the captain now. All right. Chapter 26, 1 through 14. Extra content. The mystery and majesty of God's ways. Job criticizes his friends for what is likely an unintentional but still unacceptable consequence of their approach. He questions their certitude by alluding to how much is hidden from human perspective simply in the existence and divine government of the created world. Pretty much saying, how can y'all be speaking so boldly when there's so much hidden from us? From God who created us, there's a whole spiritual side of God, a higher spiritual side from what we understand on the physical world, and yet y'all can speak so bold, right? Chapter 26. Job replies, God's majesty is unsearchable. Then Job answered and said, verse 2, how you have helped him who has no power, how you have saved the arm that has no strength, how you have counseled him who has no wisdom, and plentifully declared sound knowledge. With whose help have you uttered words, and whose breath has come out of you? Before we turn the page, extra content here. With these three statements, Job is suggesting that the presumed theological orthodoxy of Bildad and the two friends rings hollow due to its lack of any actual protection for him or reflection on the justice they pronounce. In their defense of God, the friends have neither actively helped the poor and needy, since all they have done is wrongly accuse Job, who has been their protector, nor have they bothered to discern the potential disastrous consequences of their approach, judging the circumstance of those in need to be resolved their own sin. So essentially, he's saying he said all that sarcastically. How you have helped the powerless, those lacking strength, those lacking wisdom, by scrutinizing me, how you've helped them sarcastically, right? So Job says this to his friend sarcastically. With whose help have you uttered these words? And whose breath has come from you? Person questioning, are you sure this comes from God? Because who are you helping right here? Verse 24. In light of the implied negative answers to the statements, Job asked his friends to examine whose help and whose breath has been behind, has been behind their words, lest in fear that they assume resolutely but wrongly that they have spoken on God's behalf. Right? Are you sure it's on God's behalf that you're speaking? You sure the devil ain't speaking through you? Continuing in the word. Verse 5. The dead tremble under the waters and their inhabitants. Sheol is naked before God, and Abaddon has no covering. He stretches out the north over the void and hangs the earth on nothing. He binds up the waters in his thick clouds, and the cloud is not split open under them. He covers the face of the full moon, and he spreads it over the cloud. He has inscribed a circle on the face of the waters, and the boundary between light and darkness. The pillars of heaven tremble and are astounded at his rebuke. By his power he has stilled the sea. By his understanding he shattered Rahab. By his wind the heavens were made fair. His hand pierced the fleeing serpent, the devil. Behold, these are but the outskirts of his ways, and how small a whisper do we hear him. But the thunder of his power, who can understand? Woo. Job, he's starting to talk that mess. He's really speaking towards God and for God now. Behold, these are the outskirts of his ways, and how small a whisper do we hear him? Right? This is pretty much Job claiming the power of God. Job claiming the power and many ways of God. Ways of God. And yet, but the thunder of his power, who can understand? He's done all the things, but how can we even understand them? Let's get some extra content before we get into chapter 27. I'll try to read quickly here. Verses 5 to 14. Job alludes to some obvious areas of knowledge that are open before God but concealed from human perspective, in order to warn his friends against their continued presumption that they know God's purposes in Job's disastrous circumstances. Even further, verses 5 through 10. Job uses the repeated vocabulary of his section to emphasize things that are clearly known to God but are hidden from human cognizance. The state or realm of the dead is not visible to humanity under the waters, Sheol, and Abaddon, but it is naked and has no covering before God. So death is not hidden from God. Sheol is naked from God. Sheol is naked before God. Abaddon has no covering. None is protected from God, is what it's saying. None is protected from God. Not the depths of hell, nor Abaddon, nor death itself. None is protected from it. Likewise, the description of the creation or existence of the natural world implies that other things may be hidden. The heavens appear perched over the void, and the earth appears to hang on nothing. A cloud often binds up, covers, and spreads over another element of the heavens, and itself is not split open. Let me read that again. The heavens appear perched over the void, and the earth appears to hang on nothing. Okay. And it is God who has set the limits for all these divine artifacts. He binds up the waters in his thick clouds. Job is saying some tough things here. and the cloud is not split open under them. He covers the face of the full moon, and he spreads over it his cloud, right? Because from the perspective of us, when we see the full moon, we see the clouds cover it, right? Even though the moon is in a different realm from the earth, right? Or a different space from the earth. From our perspective, it's covered up by us, right? He has inscribed a circle on the face of the waters, and the boundary between light at the boundary between light and darkness, right? And this is, if I'm interpreting that right, if I'm interpreting that right, this is for all my flat earth people out there, okay? He has inscribed a circle on the face of the waters at the boundary between light and darkness, right? What Job is seeing is a circle, right? A circle on the face of the waters, as in eventually the circle of the waters go so far out that it starts to circle out, right? At the boundary between light and darkness, what is seen and unseen, not just day and night, but what is seen and unseen. That what we cannot see is on the other side over the curved edge of the horizon. For all my flat earth people out there, which I can make a whole video on that, but for those people who think that the earth is flat, I'm like, y'all, that believing the earth is flat does not help or hurt the gospel. Obviously, nor does the earth being round. So since those two perspectives cancel each other out, just pay attention to geography. I mean, have you not traveled the earth? If you ever flew on a plane, if the earth was flat, you would see the entire earth. But also, where would the edge be? The way we understand the earth and have understood the earth from our movies, our shows, and just physically seeing, it would completely change the way we move about the earth. If the earth was flat, that geographically does not make sense. And it wouldn't make sense that both the sun and the moon are circular. Then all of a sudden the earth would be flat. That's not what this is about. All right, moving on. That's one thing that kills me that people say. I'm like, y'all, that makes no sense. That's not wisdom. That don't make sense, y'all. Okay, verse 9. The Hebrew word for full moon is a homonym, same sound and spelling but different meaning, with the word for throne. If either the latter sense is intended or the author is employing international ambiguity in using the word, then the image may refer to the heavens as concealing God in the place of his role. Okay. He covers the face of the full moon and spreads over it his cloud. Saying that, we do not understand his ways. The full moon, the full moon. The full moon, aka throne. I'll put that in there. Full moon equals throne. He covers the face of his throne and spreads over it the clouds. Right? As in, it holds some regal status. His throne holds a regal status that not all can appear to, which is a lot of what the Old Testament is putting some respect on God's name. Like, not all y'all belong up here. Not all y'all can come up here. Or only a few people in the Old Testament really got that close with God. Verses 11 through 14. The images in these verses all focus on God's power and echo a similar description in Job's first response to Bildad. The created world reveals not only that some things are hidden, but also the vast implication of God's power as the one who created and governs everything. Rahab and the fleeing serpent refer to the same being, the devil, and make the point that God is and will be sovereign over any powerful figure opposed to him. Note that in Isaiah, God used Rahab as another name for Egypt. Okay. If it is by God's power and understanding that he rules creation, Job concludes by asking how it is that, as one who merely hears the thunder of the power, any person can presume to understand. Rahab. So Rahab and the fleeing serpent, the same person. The devil. I was going to capitalize the name, but I want to give him that power. Okay. Now, moving on to chapter 27. This is going to be Job continuing his rant, and it won't stop there. A claim to integrity and a wish for vindication. This is extra content. Job refuses to agree that his friends are right, and he maintains that his circumstances are not an indication of undisclosed sin. In images similar to those his friends have used against him, Job wishes that his adversaries will be considered as the wicked are before God. 27. Job continues, I will maintain my integrity. Yes, he will. And Job again took his discourse and said, as God lives, who has taken away my right, and the Almighty, who has made my soul bitter, as long as my breath is in me, and the Spirit of God is in my nostrils, my lips will not speak falsehood, and my tongue will not utter deceit. Woo! I'm going to highlight that, bracket that. That's a word. That's something to repeat if you feel like people are speaking falsely against you, or trying to get you to speak against God, whatever it may be, people or spirits in high places. As God lives, who has taken away my right, and the Almighty, who has made my soul bitter, as long as my breath is in me, and the Spirit of God is in my nostrils, my lips will not speak falsehood, and my tongue will not utter deceit. No matter what I feel like I'm going through and how bitter I feel like God's principles have been towards me, God's ways have been towards me, I shall speak no evil, not coming from me. There'll be no deceit. I'm going to highlight that. I'm going to bracket down and put a little star next to it. Because that is a word. Come on, Job. That's a word. That's why Job just said beforehand, the things I do not understand, I'm not then going to speak against the things that I don't understand that come from God, which are all things. Right? I seek to try to understand, but still knowing that there are going to be things that I will never understand when it comes to God. Far be it from me to start speaking against him. It's foolishness. Verse 5. Far be it from me to say that you are right. Till I die, I will not put away my integrity from me. Underline that. Till I die, I will not put away my integrity from me. Job is showing you how to be bold in the midst of adversaries, in the midst of adversity. Job is showing you how to be bold. I will hold fast my righteousness, and I will not let it go. My heart does not reproach me for any of my days. Come on. I just gotta highlight these things, man. These are good stuff. Not let it go. Let's get some extra content before we turn the page or go to the next page. Verse 1. The first part of Job's long response is marked with the heading typical of the dialogues. Then Job answered and said, C26 or C26:1, the first that introduces each response. The heading here in 29:1, and Job again took up his discourse, helps to bind together the entirety of chapters 26 to 31 as Job's final speech of the dialogue, which functions as a closing statement as well as a direct response to his friends. Verse 27, chapter 27, verse 5. You, the Hebrew is plural. Job is addressing his friends collectively. 6. By asserting that he will hold fast to his integrity, Job echoes the Lord's description of him in the program, that he's upright, the prologue, that he's upright and blameless. Okay. Continuing. Some extra dialogue before moving on. 7 through 23. Because these verses seem more consistent with the speeches of Job's friends, and has been suggested that he may be misplaced and ought to be interpreted as belonging to Bildad's speech in chapter 25. Actually, let's just read that first, 7 through 23. That's the rest of this. Let's read all that first before chapter 28, and then we'll get extra contact. Verse 7. Let my enemy be as the wicked, and let him who rises up against me be as the unrighteous. For what is What is the hope of the godless when God cuts him off, when God takes away his life? Let thine enemies falter. Let thine enemies falter in the face of God, is what he's saying. Let me highlight verse 8. For what is the hope of the godless when God cuts him off, when God takes away his life? What is the hope of the ungodless when God has your back? Verse 9. Will God hear his cry when distress comes upon him? Will he take delight in the Almighty when he calls upon God at all times? I would teach you concerning the hand of God. What is with the Almighty I will not conceal. Behold, all of you have seen it yourselves. Why then have you become altogether vain? This is the portion of a wicked man with God, and the heritage that oppressors receive from the Almighty. If his children are multiplied, it is for the sword. Oof. And his descendants have not enough bread. Those who survive him, the pestilence buries, and his widows do not weep. Though he heap up silver like dust, and pile up clothing like clay. Though he heap up silver like dust, and pile up clothing like clay. I also say, though you heap up all this silver and these coins and dollars and money like dust, as in at the end of the day, it's going to be dust. But that's what you do. You might as well, you put so much effort into collecting all this money. Being wealthy is great, but that's a whole sermon on itself. And the Bible talks about the difference between building up wealth and loving money, right? And pile up clothing like clay. Verse 17. He may pile it up, but the righteous will wear it, and the innocent will divide the silver. And that's said in Proverbs too. The wickedness store up wealth for the prosper, or for the righteousness. Right? And highlight that. 16 through 18. 16 through 17. Pretty much the wickedness, you build up storage for the righteous. He builds his house like a moth's, like a booth, like a watchman makes. He goes to bed rich, but will do so no more. He opens his eyes, and his wealth is gone. I'm highlighting verse 13 because this is what I'm reading now. This is all pertaining to verse 13. 20. Terrors overtake him like a flood. In the night, a whirlwind carries him off. The east wind lifts him up, and he is gone. It sweeps him out of his place. It hurls at him without pity. He flees from its power in headlong flight. It claps his hands at him and hisses at him from his place. I'm just going to put a bracket around 13 to 23. These are the portions of the wicked. So now let's get some extra content, 7 to 23. Because these verses seem more consistent with the speech of Job's friends, it has been suggested that they may be misplaced and not to be interpreted as belonging to Bildad's speech, chapter 25. However, the similarity to the speeches of the friends can also be understood to be part of Job's purpose. Unlike his three friends, Job is not referring solely to what the wicked receive on earth, but wishes that his enemy would be like the wicked when God cuts him off and takes away his life. If Job is actually blameless before God, then those who have been his adversaries ought to consider how God weighs their own actions in light of the judgment they have described. And right now, his adversaries could very much just be his friends that he's referring to. Verses 7 through 8. Job declares that if he is right to maintain his integrity, then he also wishes that his adversaries would be considered as the wicked and unrighteous. However, unlike his friends, who assume that judgment on the wicked is generally experienced in life on earth and is transparent to observers, Job says there is no hope for the wicked when God cuts him off and takes away his life. Verse 11. Concerning the hand of God, hand, Hebrew for yad, is often a metaphor for power, but justice is the question that concerns Job and his friends. Eliphaz claimed to speak for God in correcting Job. Job, in turn, has declared that he received revelation from God that he could not deny. He will not conceal what is with God, i.e., the thoughts of the Almighty. 13. The Hebrew phrase translated with God is often explained as being better interpreted from God, because it could provide a parallel with the second line of the verse. 13, what does it say? Oh, yes. This is the portion of the wicked men from God. Okay, instead of with God, but one and the same. Okay. The purposed change is minimal and consists of one letter in the Hebrew text being understood as accidentally appended to this phrase from the word that precedes it. However, since verse 11 has a similar phrase with the Almighty, the sense of verse 13 in context does not require the change, right? Okay. Because it's pretty much saying the same thing, whether with God or from God, right? This is the portion of a wicked man with God, right? Because one way or the other, you're gonna be with God, even those who are wicked. You're with God because God is all. God is everything, right? So you're still with God. The two phrases also appear centered to Job's point. If his integrity is actually what is true with God, then Job's friends ought to consider whether they are the ones who stand in danger of the judgment that they have described. Exactly. Okay, chapter 28, Job continues. Extra content. Where is wisdom found? In a magnificent poem that plays on the theme of the dialogues regarding what is hidden and what is revealed, Job reflects on the value, mystery, and place of wisdom. The poem is structured around a question that is repeated with slight variation. But where shall wisdom be found, and where is the place of wisdom? Although man has shown great skill in mining the earth for its hidden and valuable resources, where is he to look for wisdom, which is beyond measure in its value and outside of the sphere of mere discovery? God is the one who knows his place and by whom wisdom is both given and governed. Interpreters have questioned whether chapter 28 is actually Job's speech, since it might appear to dampen the weight of God's response in chapters 38 to 41. However, even though the poem appears to be self-contained, the description of wisdom in the chapter is consistent with the grounds for Job's lament. It represents what will be shown to be true of him in the end. Job is not reproved because of his promoted folly, unlike his friends, but rather because the inferences he has drawn from wisdom has not properly reflected what he is able to know in light of what he believes to be true. Great stuff being said. Let's start back. Chapter 28, Job continues. Where is wisdom? Surely there is a mine for silver and a place for gold that they refine. Iron is taken out of the earth, and copper is smelted from the core or from the ore. So as I was saying, there's places for these minerals to be found. Man puts an end to darkness and searches out of the furthest limit the ore in gloom and deep darkness. Man puts an end to not knowing. Like you search all the caves, the darkest places to find these minerals and things. He opens shafts in a valley away from where anyone lives. They are forgotten by travelers. They hang in the air far away from mankind. They swing to and fro. As for the earth, out of it comes bread, but underneath it is turned up as by fire. Its stones are the place of sapphires, and it has dust of gold. That path no bird of prey knows, and the falcon's eye has not seen it. The proud beasts have not trodden it, the lion has not passed over it. Man puts his hand to the flinty rock and overturns mountains by the roots. He cuts out channels in the rocks, and his eye sees every precious thing. He dams up the streams so that they do not trickle, and the thing that is hidden he brings out to light. But where shall wisdom be found? Man, in all this, for the time, for the sake of time, I'm just going to continue. But there's just so much in all these things. Pretty much saying the lengths men will go to. That's how I can sum this up. Job highlights the lengths men will go to seek wealth on earth, because that's the distinction: wealth on earth, right? And just to back up to the first couple verses, earthly treasures, when you're talking about silver, gold, iron, and copper, earthly treasures can be visibly discovered. But where shall wisdom be found? And where is the place of understanding? So, despite all these other things, where can you find wisdom? Man does not know its worth, and it is not found in the land of the living. The deep says, "It is not in me," and the sea says, "It is not with me." It cannot be bought for gold, and silver cannot be weighed in its price. Essentially, everything that I just mentioned, and how, and all the different places, and where, and what man does to find gold and silver and all these things, it still does not equate to the unlimited value of wisdom. I'm going to put a bracket around verse 15. It cannot be bought for gold. Silver cannot be weighed its price, right? Draw a little arrow from 12 to 15, because that's what it's correlating to. Right. Now, before going to the next page, some extra content what we just read. All right. Extra content, verses 1 through 11. The structure of the Hebrew phrases brings the earth and its valuable treasures into focus in this section. Although it takes considerable effort, indicated by the multifaceted references to darkness, verse 3, faraway locations, verse 4, and rock, verses 9 through 10, human industry has developed ways to mine the earth for its precious elements, and even more so now compared to back then. For silver, gold, iron, copper, sapphire, or cultivated grain for bread. In these realms, whatever is hidden is brought out to light. Or verse 3. Job has used the phrase deep darkness in various images throughout the dialogue with his friends. Here, the phrase describes the success of human industry. As the remainder of the chapters make clear, Job uses the description to question, if not implicitly rebuke, his friends for presuming they have been similarly successful either in discovering wisdoms placed in the world, or discerning its presence or absence in the heart of another. We're saying, of all the things that man have done to find all these treasures, you, my friends, have been less successful or lack the success of finding wisdom. Clearly, y'all have not found it. So Job is throwing his jabs too. Verse 4. Mining practices in the ancient Near East have been neither fully discovered nor studied enough to determine precisely what is being pictured in this verse. The word translated shafts is typically used to refer to the gully of an intermittent stream, just as the word translated channels, verse 10, is typically used to refer to either a river or, as the proper name, the Nile. Archaeologists have discovered horizontal mining shafts, some examples of which are also intersected by vertical shafts that are likely used to vent mining operations. Whether it is these vertical shafts that hang in the air or not, the purpose of the images is clear. The threefold description of the remote location of the mind, away from where anyone lives, forgotten by travelers, and away from mankind, further indicates the difficulty and effort involved in humanity's pursuit of precious materials. All right, so people will go through some lengths. 7 through 8. Neither the birds of the sky, represented by the falcon's eye, nor the animals of the earth, represented by the lion, have any knowledge of endeavors like mining. It is uniquely human. It is a uniquely human accomplishment and application of skill, right? Because we were given the dominion of God. We were given the authority to have dominion over the earth, to subdue it, right? To subdue and trample over the earth, have dominion over it, right? So this is us as people exacting our dominion over the earth, right? Trampling and subduing the earth. So none of this stuff is wrong. So what we're going to do. 12 to 22, which I'm still reading. All right. So let me continue to the next chapter on to 22, and then I'll come back. 16. It cannot be valued in the gold of Afar, talking again about wisdom. Ophir, in precious onyx or sapphire. Gold and glass cannot equal it, nor can it be exchanged for jewels of fine gold. No mention shall be made of coral or of crystal. So, the gold of Ophir, onyx, sapphire, gold and glass, jewels of fine gold. No mention shall be made of coral or crystal. The price of wisdom is above pearls. The topaz of Ethiopia cannot equal it, nor can be valued in pure gold. So none of these precious materials equal the value of wisdom. None of these things. Okay. Verse 20. From where then does wisdom come, and where is the place of understanding? It is hidden from the eyes of all living and concealed from the birds of the air. Abaddon and Death say, we have heard a rumor of it with our ears. We have heard a rumor. They know nothing about it. Death say, we have heard a rumor. We know nothing about wisdom. All right. So let me go back to this extra content. 12 to 22, which we just read. The questions of verses 12 and 20 frame this section, which describes the value of wisdom and the place of understanding as unknown to mankind. The fact that they are unknown is emphasized by the number of negative statements in verses 13 to 19. Not know, not found, not in, with me, cannot be bought, weighed, valued, cannot equal it, nor can it be exchanged, valued. Verse 15 to 19, these verses contain multiple references to gold and to other precious stones such as blue sapphire, which is lapis lazuli, black or white onyx, opaque shiny crystal, bright coral, and yellow crystallite topaz. All are expensive and difficult to obtain, yet none are compatible to the value of wisdom. Also, all which were found near and in and around the Garden of Eden. If you read back to Genesis, when they mentioning the different rivers, when it mentioned the Pison, the Bison, the Tigris, and the Euphrates rivers, these materials were found around these rivers, around the Garden of Eden, in the Garden of Eden. But even these things which are laid in God's garden still does not compare to God's wisdom at the end of the day, because wisdom came before all these things. It was through wisdom and with wisdom that all things were created, along with Jesus, who represents faith, right? 21. In contrast to the early description about the past of mining and industry, the place of wisdom is hidden from the eyes of all living creatures on the earth, including humans, as well as from the birds of the air. 22. The reference to Abaddon and death here is likely playing off Job's earlier description of them as a realm that is also hidden from human observation. These two names may be simple personifications, or they may use ideas from pagan myths. Example, with death in Hebrew meaning Mawet, corresponding to the Canaanite deity Mot, to show that those other powers cannot find wisdom. Those other powers cannot find wisdom. Continuing, I'll finish with chapter 28. 23. God understands the way to use it, and he knows its place. Talking about wisdom. God understands how to use it and knows its place. For he looks to the ends of the earth and sees everything under the heavens. When he gave the wind, and just again, because people will use that, and I mentioned flat earth earlier. People say, well, when God says the ends of the earth, right? The end of the earth doesn't literally mean the end of it, as in it's flat. The ends of earth meaning to be as far as you can see it, right? From a perspective, when you look out, like when you're in a plane and you see the earth curving out, which it does, again, signifying that it's a globe. When you look out to its edge, you see the end of the edge from which you see. But when you keep moving, the edge also keeps moving with you. If there was an edge and an end of an actual ending, because the earth was flat, then the edge would stop and you would get nearer to the edge the further you got to it. But that doesn't happen. Like if you flew, I once was on a plane that was flying for 15 hours. I never reached an actual edge, but the edge is continuously rounding about, right? It's almost as if, I'm about to break it down like this. I've never heard people say it like that, and I swear I'm going to make a video on this. If God's glory could be endless, why would the earth be? Woo! That's a bar, man. So you're telling me God's reign could be endless, but he would create an earth that ends? Like that's wisdom right there. If God's reign is endless, how could the earth be? Question mark. A response to flat earth, ... I'm just going to make that a video for later. But why would, we don't even see that. And that could be a stretch, but it would make sense. It wouldn't make sense that all the things that God has created and the earth would just be flat all of a sudden. But when you continue to traverse the earth, it never ends. You could literally walk one place, and you have to swim, take a boat, fly some places if you need to, but you can keep going, and you could relatively, with harsh difficulty, you could go around the entire earth and end up back where you started because of the way God made it. All these flat earth people would make no sense. With the earth being flat, then that wouldn't be possible. There would just be this edge to the earth, which no one has ever seen. We've been to all places of the earth as people, and not one person has ever brought any evidence there being a flat earth. But there is ample upon ample evidence that the earth is round. Evidence. These flat earth people only take it from the Bible because they misinterpret some things from the Bible. The four corners of the earth is not actual corners of the earth. It's four directions of the earth. You could take any two directions and you could design a corner, if you will, but they're not actual corners. They're talking about four directions of the earth. But people got to take some things into context. It's crazy. This flat earth stuff is crazy. Okay, 25. I'm ranting right now. When he gave to the wind its weight and apportioned the waters by measure, when he made a decree for the rain and a way for the lightning of the thunder, then he saw it and declared it. He established it and searched it out. Ooh. He saw it and declared it. He established it and searched it out. He said to man, behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom. and turn away from evil, and to turn away from evil is understanding. Behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to turn away from evil is understanding. That's what Proverbs is all about. God, God only established the ways of all being, as in the ways of how all things exist and the way all being, how all existence is, right? The ways of all being. Seek Him. To gain understanding, right? Mind you, Job was saying this before Jesus came and said, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God." Job was already understanding this. Extra content before moving on. Chapter 23 to 28. The closing section of the chapter makes it clear that only God understands and knows wisdom and how it is acquired. He is the only one before whom both the earth and the heavens are fully revealed because He is the one who created them. Wisdom is thus given by God. It came through His speaking and defined in relation to Him. The fear of the Lord, that is wisdom. That's said in Proverbs. And to turn away from evil is understanding. That is Proverbs, which is coming up next. Job may be rebuking his friends for the treatment of him, implying that they have not acted in a way consistent with the fear of the Lord. Confer the way that the book confer the way that the book characterizes Job himself. Job 1:1, right? Ooh, so I just love that with all these things that his friends are saying towards him, Job still has a beautiful thing to say to God. Still says, guys, if Job can see that his friends are not acting righteous, they're not acting with wisdom. Okay. Now, this is going to be the last two chapters, 29 and 30. Or actually, 29. Yeah, 29 and 30. Before we meet another character in the story of Job. 29 to 31, extra content. The path of Job's life. Job reflects on his life in the past, the present, and what he wishes would be revealed and vindicated in the future. Much of Job's soliloquy in chapter 3 launched the dialogue with his somber reflection on his oranges. So too, chapter 29 and 31 conclude the dialogues with Job's reflections on the current and future state. Is it 31 too? Oh. Let's get 31. Oh, yes. Yes, it is 31. 29 and 31. Yes. Okay. 29. Job's summary defense. And Job again took his discourse and said, actually, before I get there, let me read this first. A little bit extra content. Just chapter 29, right? Because verse 1 through 25. Yeah. Chapter 29. Job laments the loss of the past when he felt that he had the presence and protection of God, as well as the respect of all those among who has lived, which matched the way he lived his life in the pursuit of righteousness and justice. So in this first chapter, so it seems like 29 is going to be about his past, 30 is going to be about his present, and 31 the future that he wants to see. Okay. 29. Job's summary defense. And Job again took up his discourse and said, "Oh, that I were as in the months of old, as in the days when God watched over me, when his lamp shone upon my head, and by his light I walked through darkness, as I was in my prime. When the friendship of God was upon my tent, when the Almighty was yet with me, my children were all around me, when my steps were washed with butter, and the rock poured out for me streams of oil." That's a lament. Extra content as we turn the page. 29:1. And Job again took up his discourse. See note 27:1. Okay. Verses 2 to 6. Job refers to days in which he felt the presence of God guarding, when God watched over me and guiding him, when his lamp shone upon my head and by his light I walked. Job felt that it was a time when he was in his prime, or with the ESV footnotes, autumn days, which would be the season of harvest, because the friendship of God, verse 4, was evident on his household, verse 5, as well as his flocks and fields, verse 6. Highlight something. I'll put Job's lament. Verse 6, wash with butter. Job was renowned for his herds of cattle and his olive groves that produce riches from the earth. So that's what butter and oil represent, right? Wash with butter. Is abundant. He was abundant. Riches / wealth. Continuing. Verse 7. When I went out to the gate of the city, when I prepared my seat in the square, the young men saw me and withdrew, and the aged rose and stood. He was respected. The young men saw me, withdrew, the aged rose and stood. He was respected amongst men. I'm sure it's going to be mentioned in the extra content, but yeah. The princes refrained from talking and laid their hand on their mouth. Wow. I'm going to underline. The young men saw refused. The aged rose and stood. Princes refrained from talking, even princes. The voices of the nobles were hushed, and their tongues stuck to the roof of their mouths. Wow. When the ear heard, it called me blessed, and when the eye saw it, it approved. So those who heard about me knew me. They saw me. They approved of me because I delivered the poor who cried for help. Throwing that back in his face. Hold on, I know what he about to do. All the things that his friends said that they didn't do. He shunned the fatherless. He dismissed the widow. He dismissed the hungry, the poor. But why was I respected? Job says, because I delivered the poor who cried for help, and the fatherless who had none to help him. The blessing of him who was about to perish came upon me, and I caused the widow's heart to sing for joy. All these things that y'all said I didn't do. Why do you think I was wealthy in the first place? It's like if I'm Job, I'm looking at my friends like, y'all said all these things about me, but I'm wealthy because I did these things. I put on righteousness and it clothed me. I'm highlighting all this stuff. My justice was like a robe and a turban. I was eyes to the blind and feet to the lame. I was a father to the needy. I was a shelter. And I searched out the cause of him whom I did not know. I broke the fangs of the unrighteous and made him drop his prey in his teeth. Then I thought, I shall die in my nest, and I shall multiply my days as the sand. My roots spread out to the waters, and the dew all night on my branches, and my glory fresh with me, and my bow ever new in my hand. Wow. So despite Job's friends' accusations, of evil, he declares he's wealthy due to all the good he's done. And why he has the respect that he does. Continuing in verse 21, men listened to me, kept silent, waited and kept silence for my counsel. They listened to me and waited. After I spoke, they did not speak again, and my word dropped upon them. My word dropped upon them. They waited for me as for the rain, and they opened their mouths as for the spring rain to taste it. I smiled on them when they had no confidence. And the light of my face they did not cast down. Job was a blessing to these people. I chose their way and sat as chief, and I lived like a king among my troops, like no one who conform, like one who comforts mourners. Throwing that back at him. Like one who comforts mourners. Right? As you guys sit here and despise me and poke at me and berate me, for those same people who've gone through things as I'm going through things right now, I was with them as a comforter. Heavy stuff, Job. Let's get some context and all this stuff. 7 to 25. Job opens and closes this section with a description of the honor that he once received from people in every sphere of influence. Job's wish is not simply that he would regain his honor, but that the grounds for his respect, for this respect, would be remembered, beginning with because. He not only spoke in wisdom, but also embodied what it required by caring for the poor and fatherless, for the one about to perish and for the widow, and by protecting and preserving the needy. When Job looks back on what he thought the course of his life would be, he uses several images, including that of a well-rooted tree that would continue to bear fruit, benefiting himself and others. 11 through 13. But Job is also showing you the more you give to people and provide problems for solutions, you will get rewarded for that. Job was a problem solver. And so are some of the wealthiest people around the world. Let's just keep it honest, right? Some of the wealthiest people in the world solve problems. All right? That's not where all wealth comes from. I mean, in some sort of sense, depending on how you look at the word problem, but the wealthy people solve problems, right? You're either creating a problem or you're solving it. Some do both, I guess. When Job looks back on what he thought the course of his life would be, he uses several images, including that of a well-rooted tree that would continue to bear fruit, benefiting himself and others. Right? For similar images of benefits of a fruitful life, faithful life, see Psalms, Proverbs, and Jeremiah. Okay. 11 to 13. The blessing that Job received from others signified the blessing he had been to those who had no one to help them and needed to be delivered. Verses 12. In the next section, Job will lament his need for someone to deliver him, now that he is the one crying for help. 14 to 16. Job had been a person of significant means, who used possessions and influence as if it were clothed with righteousness and justice, to provide what the blind, lame, needy, and those who did not know could not do for themselves. Job's actions contrast with how he is treated now that he is in need. We'll get into that. 16. Searched out the cause. Job took up legal cases even when there could be no possible benefit for him. 17. The wicked are pictured here as if they hunt for victims like a predator. Job describes his actions on behalf of the needy as equivalent to breaking the fangs of the unrighteous, presumably because he exposed and unraveled the means by which they had snared the poor as their prey. 20. Job is likely referring to the eternal strength, my glory, and the external vigor, my bow, that were the mutual signs of the benefits of a life lived in wisdom. Say, my wisdom brought me all my wealth. 24. As one who utilized his means for righteousness and justice, the smile and light of Job's face encouraged those without hope and reflected the character and presence of God. 25. It is with some irony that Job refers to the past when some listened for his words and did not speak afterward, and also to the way that he formerly lived like one who comforts mourners. His friends originally set out to comfort him, but instead became agitated with his words and ended up acting as his accusers. So he brought the past, saying that when I spoke to people, they listened with an open ear, and usually after they spoke, they understood. And Job was saying, now you as my friends, I'm speaking to you. But not only do you not want to hear, you continue to attack me. And especially when right now I need your comfort, you destroy me even more. I can see in the way Job speaks when he's mourning, he's dropping bars. So I can just imagine how he was like when his life was rich and wealthy and happier in a sense, right? Because the way he's speaking in his lamenting time, he's still giving us so much wisdom. Chapter 30, continuing, all right, extra content. All right, now this is going to be about Job contrasts the honor of his past with his present circumstances by describing the men who taunt him, their actions against him, and his own internal affliction, before a concluding section that references both his past acts of compassion and his present lack of hope or help. Okay. Chapter 30, verse 1. But now they laugh at me. But now they laugh at me. Jesus says similar things when he's being persecuted. Men who are younger than I, whose fathers I would have disdained to set with the dogs of my flock. Those younger than me, whose fathers I respected, and never would put in such a lowly place, as he said. Verse 2. What could I gain from the strength of their hands, men whose vigor is gone? Through want and hard hunger, they gnaw the dry ground by night in waste and desolation. They pick saltwort and the leaves of bushes, and the roots of the broom tree for their food. They are driven out from human company. They shout after them as after a thief. In the gullies of the torrents they must dwell. In holes of the earth and of the rocks, amongst the bushes they bray. Under the nettles they huddle together. A senseless, a nameless brood. They have been wiped out of the land. And now I have become their song. I am a byword to them. Just a passing word to them. Just something to sing about. They abhor me and they keep aloof from me. They do not hesitate to spit at the sight of me. Sheesh. Now because I'm suffering, the same people who praise me are now despise me because of my sufferings. Because God had loosed my cord and humbled me, they have cast off restraint in my presence. At my right hand, the rabble rise, and they push away from me. They cast up against me their ways of destruction. They break up my path. They promote my calamity. They need no one to help me. As through a wide breach they come. Amid the crash they roll on. Another reason why Proverbs says to not put your trust and faith in men. The same people who are like, oh yeah, good job, Job, and all this stuff, when all was going well. The moment the light disappears from me, there's no one around me to light a lamp for me. There's no one around me with the lamp lit. The moment my life gets dark. That's why you don't put your faith in men. Men are fickle. We are fickle. We are a fickle creature. Okay. Extra content. 1 through 8. Job describes how much of a reversal his current situation presents. Although he had delivered the truly needy from the oppression of unrighteousness, or oppression of the unrighteous, those who presume to mock him as if he has received the judgment of the unrighteous are themselves needy because of their own actions and foolishness. Verse 4. The plants mentioned here present the food of desperation. Saltwort is a low, struggling bush with thick, sour-tasting leaves. The broom tree is a shrub with long, straight branches, small leaves, and poisonous roots. Because the broom tree's roots are both poisonous and known for their heat when burned, an alternative vocalization of the Hebrew is sometimes followed with the sense of for their warmth. However, the known quality of the broom tree's roots may be used here simply to highlight the dire situation of these men. Verse 8, senseless. The Hebrew is literally sons of a fool, and infers further that the men being described are some way morally responsible for the circumstances. Confer with the description of the foolish in Proverbs 1, chapter 1, 29 and 32. Verses 9 to 15. Although Job has restrained the unrighteous, he describes those who now presume to deride him, casting off any restraint as if they are taking advantage of an easy military conquest in which they sing and spit out his downfall, while building siege ramps against him, breaching his defenses and looting him. Verse 11. In contrast to the past, God has loosened the cord that secured Job's tent, and men of low esteem have taken the opportunity to unbridle their tongues and embolden their posture in his presence. 14. Amid the crash, the rabble storm upon Job, like a troop of soldiers pouring through a wide breach in the fortification. They continue uninhabited in their plunder. They pick at him like vultures. Verse 15 says, terrors are turned upon me. My honor is pursued as by the wind, and my prosperity has passed away like a cloud. Continuing, I'll finish all the way to chapter 31. Verse 16. And now my soul is poured out within me. Days of affliction have taken a hold of me. All right. Because sometimes we feel that way. Sometimes we feel like we're in the midst of affliction. Our soul is just crying out, being poured out, being emptied out. The night racks my bones, and the pain that gnaws me takes no rest. With great force, my garment is disfigured. It binds me about like the collar of my tunic. God has cast me into the mire, and I become like dust and ashes. I become like dust and ashes. Like death. To death we were made, and to death from dust we came, and from dust we return, right? Feels like death. I'll put that. Like death. ... 20. I cry to you for help, and you do not answer me. I stand, and you only look at me. You have turned cruel to me. With the might of your hand, you persecute me. You lift me up on the wind. You make me ride on it, and you toss me about in the roar of the storm. For I know that you will bring me to death into the house appointed for all living. Yet does not one in a heap of ruins stretch out his hand? And yet does not one in a heap of ruins stretch out his hand, and in his disaster cry for help? Did not I weep for him whose day was hard? Hmm. Was not my soul grieved for the needy? But when I hoped for good, evil came, and when I waited for light, darkness came. I did all these great things, but when it was my turn now, how many of us feel that way? We did so much for people around us, but when we needed somebody, nobody to be found. 27. My inward parts are in turmoil and never still. Days of affliction come to meet me. I go about darkened, but not by the sun. I stand up in the assembly and cry for help. I am a brother of jackals and a companion of ostriches. My skin turns black and falls from me, and my bones burn with heat. My lyre is turned to mourning, and my pipe to the voice of those who weep. Wow. Let's get some extra content. Some heavy stuff Job is saying. It's heavy, heavy, heavy. It's a huge contrast from chapter 30, from chapter 29. It's a huge contrast, obviously. 1623 extra content. Job laments the isolation in which he now pours out his soul as one who wastes away without help and waits for death. 16. My soul is poured out. An idiom for grief. Confer with the psalmist in his longing for worship at the temple. Psalms 42. 18. The description of Job's solitary grief and disfigured clothes contrasts with his earlier image of being clothed with righteousness and justice for the sake of delivering those in need. 20. Job feels that his present cry for help from God is unanswered, which contrasts with the description of Job's early actions in behalf of others. 24 to 31. Job concludes this section by picturing himself as being like one of those who cries for help he used to answer, but who in his own distress has found evil where he hoped for good, in isolation and mourning when he has called for help. This is some heavy stuff. That's some heavy, heavy stuff. Okay. That's how I was going to 31. No, that's how I was going to 37. Okay. 31. All right. Now, Job speaks more about his future. It's 31 through 40. I think that's all 31. Right. Some extra content. After contrasting the honor of his past in 29 with the disdain he receives because of circumstances in the present, chapter 30, Job confesses one last time that he has lived his life in the pursuit of righteousness because he believes that is how it should be lived before God, that turning from God's way is without benefit, and that further curses should come on him if these things are not true. Job begins by affirming his commitment to fidelity and questions how he could break it. Sections that follows each open with a conditional statement implying that his life has not been patterned by what is described, stealing and coveting, neglecting the needs of those both within his household and without, trust in or worship of anything other than God, concealing hatred or sin, or improper oversight of his land. Embedded in the end of this section is a final wish that the charges would be presented to him so that he could give an account. I'm sure he's saying that to God. Give me my charges, man. Tell me what's up. What did I do? Okay. Job's final appeal, chapter 31. I have made a covenant with my eyes. How then could I gaze at a virgin? What would be my portion from God above my heritage from the Almighty on high? It is not calamity for my unrighteousness, for the unrighteous, and disaster for the workers of iniquity. Does not he see my ways and number all my steps? If I have walked with falsehood, and my foot has hastened to deceit, let me be weighed in a just balance, and let God know my integrity. All right, so if I'm wrong, let God know that I am sincere, that I have tried to do the best that I could. If my step has turned aside from the way, and my heart has gone after my eyes, and if any spot has stuck to my hands, then let me sow and another eat, and let what grows from me be rooted out. Then let me sow and another eat. Then let what I do prosper somebody else and not me. Essentially what he's saying. Verse 9. If my heart has been enticed toward a woman, and I have lain in wait at my neighbor's door, covetousness. That's what he's saying, speaking on covetousness. Which is in the commandments. Is it covetousness or covetousness? I think I butchered that. Then let my wife grind for another. That's crazy. And let others bow down on her. He's making it plain. For that would be a heinous crime. Now, what would be an iniquity to be punished by the judges? For that would be a fire that consumes as far as Abaddon, and it would burn to the root all my increase. Essentially, if I'm wicked, let me suffer more. That's what he's saying. If I have rejected the cause of my manservant or my midservant, when they brought a complaint against me, what then shall I do when God rises up? When he makes inquiry, what shall I answer him? Did not he who made me in the womb make him? And did not one fashion us in the womb? If I withheld anything that is poor desired, or have caused the eyes of the widow to fail, or have eaten my morsel alone, and the fatherless have not eaten of it. For from my youth a fatherless grew up with me as with a father. And from my mother's womb I guided the widow. If I seen anyone perish from lack of clothing, or with needing with clothing, or the needy with covering, if his body has not blessed me, and if he has not warmed with the fleece of the sheep, if he was not warmed, if I have raised my head against the fatherless, my hand, because I saw my help in the gate, then let my shoulder blade fall from my shoulder, and let my arm be broken from its socket. For I was in terror of calamity from God, and I could not have faced his majesty. And my shoulder blade fall, pretty much, let me do nothing else. Let me do no other works. If all the things I did with my hands and my arms was not to help other people, then let my arms fall off. I'm going to highlight all these questions. If I have walked with falsehood, if my heart has been enticed, if I rejected the cause of those who served under me, if I withheld anything that the poor desired, if I have made my gold my trust, or called the fine gold my confidence. We're going to get into that, but pretty much if you put your faith in love and in money, we're going to get into that in a second. Just to jump back a little bit further with extra content. Chapter 31, verses 1 through 4. Job believes that his life is lived before and governed by the Almighty, who does number all my steps. His confidence is in this fact, is the grounds upon which he uses the same vocabulary to make his final wish that the Almighty might answer him. Verse 35, and that he can give him an account of all my steps. Verse 37. Verse 1, further context. In affirming his moral purity, Job recalls a personal commitment he has made regarding what he would and would not gaze at all, what he calls a covenant with my eyes. In particular, he professes purity in avoiding sexual lust. How then could I gaze at a virgin? The faithful reader would recognize the soundness of such a commitment, and Jesus teaches about such purity of desires. Yes, he does. Verse 5 through 7. Job's reference to the way he has walked, to where his heart has led him, and to whether he has turned aside from the way, describes his life in images that evoke the profile of wisdom. Verse 11 to 12. Job grounds his own caution against adultery, verse 9, in the warnings of his consequences, both of them being punished by the judges, and is having ruinous and far-reaching effects, like fire. The reference to Abaddon signifies Job's presumption that the way he has walked, his consequences beyond the mere extent of all his earthly increase. 13 to 15. Job did not reject the needs of his servants, lest they should have a complaint against him, in fear that they should have a complaint against him, for which he would have no answer for God. Verse 15. Or for which he would have no answer for God. Job will use this vocabulary again in his final plea that he would receive an answer for his adversary. The Hebrew term is related to the non-translated complaint, adversary. 31. Verse 16 to 23. Care for the poor widow, fatherless, needy, and sojourner is prescribed in the apprenticeship. Such action shows that someone understands that he or she lives with others before God and is called to fear him alone. Fear God alone. Job lived this way because he believed God weighed his actions and he understood that calamity was the consequence for the unrighteous. And this is where we stopped. Verses 24, 28. Okay, continuing. If I make gold my trust, or call the fine gold my confidence, if I have rejoiced because my wealth was abundant, or because my hand has found much, if I have looked at the sun when it shone, or the moon moving in splendor, and my heart has been secretly enticed, and my mouth has kissed my hand. This also would be an iniquity to be punished by the judges, for I would have been false to God above. If my mouth has kissed my hand, that sounds like to me saying, if my own praises worship my works, like if I boast in my own works and not in God blessing me, my mouth kissing my own hand, like this me praising myself. That's what that sounds like to me. 29. If I have rejoiced at the ruin of him who hated me, if I hated those who hated me, or exalted when evil overtook him, so must have done that. 30. I have not let my mouth sin by asking for his life with a curse. Or I have not let my mouth sin by asking for life with a curse. If the men of my tent have not said, who is there that has not been filled with his meat? The sojourner has lodged in the street. I have opened my doors to the traveler. If I have concealed my transgressions as others do, by hiding my iniquity in my heart, because I stood in great fear of the multitude, and the contempt of families terrified me, so that I kept silence and did not go out of doors. So I was a loner, kept to myself. Keeping to oneself. Oh, that I had one to hear. I want to underline too. If I have concealed my transgressions as others do, by hiding the iniquity of my heart, knowing that I'm false, knowing that I'm wicked, I have sin within me, but holding on to it. 35. Oh, that I have one to hear. Here's my signature. Let the Almighty answer me. Oh, that I had the indictment written by my adversary. Surely I would carry it on my shoulder. I would bind it on me as a crown. I would give him an account of all my steps. Like a prince, I would approach him. If my land has cried out against me, and its furrows have wept together, if I had eaten its yield without payment, and made its owners breathe their last, let thorns grow instead of wheat, and foul weeds instead of barley. My land has cried out against me. If I've done all these things, let me continue to suffer. Extra content 24 to 28. Job has guarded against both the idolatry of trusting the wealth that God has provided rather than trusting God, yes, and the idolatry of worshiping what God has created. Job's faithfulness in this matter is grounded in the fact that idolatry is to be punished by the judges as an action that is false to God above, as in adultery. This is the emphasis of Job's final appeal. He has consciously lived his life as if it were open before and in service to the God of heaven and earth. 31. Who is there that has not been filled with his meat? The question obviously calls for a negative response. Those of Job's household were always well fed. Offering food and lodging was of critical importance to secure strangers from the dangers of the streets at night. 33. As others do. There may be an allusion here to the Genesis story, where Adam tries to conceal his sin from God. 35 to 37. Job wishes once again for an answer regarding his offenses. Verse 35. See that he might give an account of all his steps. Verse 37. To the one who numbers them, which is God. See verse 4. The Hebrew for numbers and account are related. Wow. That's the end of 31. So this is... Oh, I missed one. After verse 30, it says, let thorns grow instead of wheat, and the foul weeds instead of barley. Then it says, the words of Job are ended. Wow. That's the last thing Job has to say, I guess, for now. I mean, he pretty much just went in. He's like, him cutting off Bildad and just continuing on this 3-chapter rant. I mean, if his friends don't get it at this point, Job was like, look, I'm not trying to hear from y'all no more. Like, this conversation is done. If I've done all these things, if I'm really that bad, then fine. Let me continue to receive even more harsh treatment. But I lived a life where I was given all these things you accuse me of. I'm wealthy because of all the things that I've done. All the righteousness and the judgment that I live by, the pure judgment in which I live by, and the truthful righteousness in which I live by. That was the reason for my wealth. But in that wealth, I didn't use it for my own grain or for my own gain. I didn't eat my own grain. I gave it to others, to the fatherless, to the widow, to the downtrodden, to the heartless. Those who had no one to speak for them, I spoke for them. Those who had no bed, I comforted them in the midst of their own sorrow, in their own grief. I did all these things that led to God gracing me and God giving me wealth, right? So to these 3 friends, I'm like, y'all, get out my face. I've done too much to sit here and continue to let this pestilence go any further, right? Let y'all attack me. So I gotta take a quick version break. Let's take a break. If you're with me, let's take a break, and we'll come back and we'll finish 32 to 37. These are going to be the words of one named Elihu. And I guess we're going to find out who that is because he's mentioned in the extra content, but so far we have not heard his name. I don't think, maybe in the beginning I forgot they mentioned Elihu. I don't think so. All they mentioned were his three friends. Right? There's no mention of Elihu so far. We're going to figure out who that is in a second. Let me turn off this heater. All right. Continuing. And we're back. Back with verse 32. Meeting a man named Elihu. I don't know how you say it. Okay. So let's get some extra content. So verse 32, or chapter 32 to 37, which we're going to finish this live off with. It says here, Elihu, suffering as a discipline. The opening verses of this section introduces the person and perspective of Elihu and are followed by an uninterrupted section of his speeches. These include an announcement of his intention to speak and an initial challenge to Job, a general dispute against what Job has asserted, and a description of Job's place before God, and a lengthy section that describes and defends God's majesty. I guess I should mention that with the chapters. These include an arrangement of his intention to speak, chapter 32, an initial challenge to Job, chapter 33, a general dispute against what Job has asserted, 34, a description of Job's place before God, 35, and a lengthy section that describes and defends God's majesty, 36 to 37. Elihu is not addressed in the Lord's speeches, that follow immediately after his own, nor is he referred to in the description either of the prologue or the epilogue. Interpreters have differed on how to understand the function of Elihu's speeches in light of his lack of explicit reference or evaluation. While the Lord's response to Job will include some vocabulary and references that are similar to portions of Elihu's speeches, he does not command either Elihu's suggested reason for Job's suffering or his anger against Job. See also discussion of Elihu in introduction literacy features. Okay. So essentially, who this dude is, who knows? Okay. Chapter 32, 1 through 5. Introduction, Elihu and his anger. The brief narrative section preceding Elihu's speeches indicates that Job's three friends have nothing more to say to Job. Verse 1 introduces Elihu, verse 2, and describes the perspective on what has transpired. The section contains repeated statements that indicate the manner in which Elihu takes up his speech. He burned with anger because no one had been given to Job, because no answer had been given to Job. Okay. Elihu rebukes Job's three friends. So these three men ceased to answer Job because he was righteous in his own eyes. Then Elihu, the son of Barachel, the Buzite of the family of Ram, burned with anger. So Elihu, son of Barachel the Buzite, the family of Ram, burned with anger. He burned with anger at Job because he justified himself rather than God. That's one complaint. He burned with anger also at Job's three friends because they had found no answer, although they had declared Job to be in the wrong. Now Elihu, still not really understanding who exactly he is, but okay. But Elihu had waited to speak to Job because they were older than he. And when Elihu saw that there was no answer in the mouth of these men, he burned with anger. And Elihu, the son of Barachel, the Buzite, answered and said, I'm young in years, and you are aged. Therefore I was timid and afraid to declare my opinion to you. I said, let my days speak, and many years teach wisdom. But it is the spirit in man, the breach of the Almighty, that makes him understand. So it says, not because I said, let me wait till I get more wisdom, but I got a spirit within me. It is not the old who are wise, nor the aged who understand what is right. Therefore I say, listen to me, let me also declare my opinion. He says, not because I'm young that I can't be wise. I got the spirit within me, y'all. Let me get this whole highlight. I said, let days speak and many years teach wisdom. But it is not old age who are wise. Behold, verse 11, behold, I waited for your words. I listened for your wise sayings, while you searched out what to say. I gave you my attention, and behold, there was none among you who refuted Job or who answered his words. Beware lest you say, we have found wisdom. God may vanquish him, not a man. He has not directed his words against me, and I will not answer him with your speeches. They are dismayed, they answer no more, and they have not a word to say. And shall I wait because they do not speak, because they stand there and answer no more? Let's get some extra content before we move on here. I think I read this part. Verse 2. Elihu's introduction includes a reference to his father and family that is more explicit than that of any of the three friends. So I'm deep in this book. The reference may be included for the way it signifies Elihu's understanding of his role. Example, Barachel may mean either may God bless or God is blessed, or possibly his need for further introduction in light of his youth. Verse 3. Although Elihu burned with anger against both Job and his friends, when the same phrase is used in the Lord in the epilogue, his anger burns only against the three friends because they had not affirmed what was right before the Lord, as Job has done. Okay. Verse 6 to 22. The voice of youth. Let me finish at 22. I stopped at 16. Let's continue. And shall I wait because they do not speak, because they stand there and answer no more? "17. I also will answer with my share. I also will declare my opinion, for I am full of words. The spirit within me constrains me. Behold, my belly is like wine that has no vent, like new wineskins ready to burst. I must speak that I might find relief. I must open my lips and answer. I will not show partiality to any man or use flattering words towards any person, for I do not know how to flatter, else my maker would soon take me away. Okay. He's like, I'm coming with the heat. All right, you go ahead, young man. He's like, I've listened to y'all older men speak. Now it's my turn. Okay, so back to the extra content. 6 to 22, the voice of youth. Elihu's opening speech is a repetitive declaration of what the opening narrative section has described. Elihu has waited to speak because he's younger than his three friends, so he's respectful. But now that it is clear to him that they do not have any answer for Job, he feels compelled to speak. Elihu directs this section primarily at the friends and emphasizes his right and intention to declare my opinion. So I guess Elihu has been sitting here this whole time listening. I'm like, I'm confused. They never mentioned anybody about Elihu. They never mentioned Elihu, but I guess he's been here this whole time. I don't even know where he comes from. Really, if I didn't have the extra content, I never would have heard his name until this point. But I guess he's been here. Okay. All right, so that's a clear to my opinion. Elihu directs this section primarily at the friends and emphasizes his right and intention to declare my opinion. Verse 8. Elihu plays on the words spirit and breath in his early speeches, in the way most likely to evoke Job's earlier plea, as he asserts his own right to speak. Verse 18 through 20. In verse 8, Elihu claims he is not speaking by choice but by necessity. Elihu may be thinking he is like a prophet, but the reader may judge whether he is right. On the difficulty of assessing Elihu, see the discussion in the introduction. Literary features. Hold on, man. I gotta go back a little bit, because I don't think I read this introduction with everybody. Well, maybe they'll give some description of who Elihu actually is. Let's see. Theological themes, purpose, occasion, and background. I'm looking for Elihu. Job and his setting. Literary features. The character made it one who alone in the book bears a Hebrew name Elihu. He is God. Apostle Yahweh is God. Son of Barahel. Elihu means he is God. Apostle Yahweh is God. Yahweh is God. Yahweh is God. So we still really figure out like who are the relevance, but I do like that. His name, he is God, and Yahweh is God. Names of people is very important. Very important. So meaning he is God, or Yahweh. God. Okay. Okay. Moving on to chapter 33. Another arbiter for Job. Elihu opens and closes this section with a call for Job to listen to his words and answer if he is able. He then presents a summary of Job's contentions regarding himself, his circumstances, and God's seeming silence. before suggesting ways that God speaks in order to turn a person from the way he leads to death. Okay, verse 1. Chapter 33. Elihu rebukes Job. But now hear my speech, O Job, and listen to all my words. Behold, I open my mouth. The tongue of my mouth speaks. My words declare the uprightness of my heart, and what my lips know, they speak sincerely. The Spirit of God has made me, and the breath of the Almighty gives me life. Okay, yes, he does. Great recognition there. Answer me if you can. Set your words in order before me. Take your stand. Behold, I am toward God as you are. I too was pinched off from a piece of clay. Behold, no fear of me need terrify you. My pressure will not be heavy upon you. That's nice. Surely you have spoken in my ears, and I have heard the sound of your words. You say, I am pure without transgression. I am clean, and there is no iniquity in me. Behold, he finds occasions against me. He counts me as his enemy. He puts my feet in the stocks and watches all my paths. Behold, in this you are not right. I will answer you, for God is greater than man. Why do you contend against him, saying, he will answer none of a man's words? For God speaks in one way, and in two, though man does not perceive it. Okay, he coming out strong. Okay, Elihu. God is greater than man. Oh, dang. God is greater than man. For God speaks in one way, and in two, though man cannot perceive it. Let's get some extra content before we move on to the next page. Verse 1. Elihu frames his rebuke with a call for Job to listen to his words, which he likely sees as serving to fulfill the silence left by Job's friends, as well as to explain how God may be speaking on the very points where Job has claimed he is silent. Elihu appears to be evoking Job's earlier statement where he declared that as long as he has had breath, his lips could not speak falsely by agreeing that his friends were right. Elihu plays on Job's words to assert that what he has to say is equally an upright and sincere declaration. Verse 9. Elihu summarizes Job's statements as if Job had argued that he was pure and without transgression. However, it is clear from Job's regular practice of making burnt offerings that this was not his claim, which was focused instead on denying the suggestion that his hidden sin was at the root of his suffering. By mischaracterizing Job's plea, Elihu ends up offering a similar argument to that of the three friends. God is greater than man, and thus he must have intended to warn or rebuke Job. He mischaracterized Job's plea. So he's starting off strong, but he's also making some assumptions just like his friends. Verse 11. Puts my feet in the stocks. Elihu quotes Job verbatim. God has made Job his enemy, pursuing him like a leaf driven in the wind. Verse 14. For God speaks, though man does not perceive it. Elihu is suggesting that Job is not recognized and maybe even has ignored the ways in which God has spoken to him, or has not recognized and may has even ignored the ways in which God has spoken to him. Okay. So far, he's starting off strong, but it's strong like his friends. So we'll see. Let's continue. 15. In a dream, in a vision of the night, when deep sleep falls on men, while they slumber on their beds, then he opens the ears of men and terrifies them with warnings. So God speaks to you in your dreams, yes. That he may turn man aside from his deed and counsel and conceal pride from a man. He keeps back his soul from the pit, his life from perishing in the sword. Yeah, that's true. In a dream, he opens the ears of men and terrifies them with a warning. That's true. God warns his children of their coming danger in dreams. Dreams, should they not repent? It's true, sir. It's true. Continuing. Man is also rebuked with pain on his bed, and with continual strife in his bones, so that his life loathes bread, and his appetite the choicest food. 21. His flesh is so wasted away that it cannot be seen, and his bones that were not seen stick out. His soul draws near the pit, and his life to those who bring death. If there be for him an angel, a mediator, one of the thousand, to declare to man what is right for him, and he's merciful to him and says, deliver him from going down to the pit, and I have found a ransom. Let his flesh become fresh from youth. Let him return to the days of his youthful vigor. Then man prays to God, and he accepts him. He sees his face with a shout of joy, and he restores to man his righteousness. He sings before men and says, I sinned and perverted what was right, and it was not repaid to me. He has redeemed my soul from going down into the pit, and my life shall look upon the lighter, or my life shall look upon the light. Behold, God does all these things twice, 3 times with a man, to bring back his soul from the pit, that he may be lighted with the light of life. That's good. Again, out of context, this is good stuff that he's saying. Out of context, good things. I want to highlight or underline verse 19. Man is also rebuked with pain on his bed. So, with him being warned, he's also pained. He's also is pained and rebuked with pain on his bed, with the continuous strife in his bones, so that his life loathes bread, and his appetite choices food. He won't be able to eat the same way as he's grieving. 31. Pay attention, O Job, listen to me. Be silent, and I will speak. If you have any words, answer me. Speak, for I desire to justify you. If not, listen to me. Be silent, and I will teach you wisdom. Whew. He's saying some tough stuff. He sounds like his friends, and not like a younger guy is talking to him. Like, bro, if I'm Job, I'm sitting there like, I'm looking at this young man. I mean, you're again, like my friends, you're trying to say good things, but the way this is going, it doesn't seem like it's going to land the way he wants it to land, Elihu. It doesn't seem like it. Let's get some extra content here. Verse 18, Elihu repeatedly states that the purpose of God speaking to a person in the way he describes is to keep his soul from the pit. Thus, he implies that Job's suffering may be a corrective of his overall path rather than simply punishment for some hidden sin. So instead of being punished for some sin, he's just being corrected. That's what he was trying to imply. However, given the Lord's description of Job in the prologue, right, being blameless and upright, Elihu's suggestion seems very similar to, and if not even more severe condemnation than the one offered by the 3 friends. Like I'm saying, it's like you're starting off strong, but you're sounding just like his friends. Like I don't know where all these guys are coming from. They want to speak so much life into Job and correct him all something. Like, who are y'all? What is coming up? What is this? Verse 19 to 22. The images that Elihu employs in this section are surely aimed at encouraging Job to see his similar physical state as signifying that God has spoken mercifully through his circumstances to keep him from the path he was on. Verses 23 to 28. Elihu poses a hypothetical situation in which an angel or mediator might act on behalf of a person to deliver him, and he suggests that the appropriate response would be repentance and rejoicing. When Elihu tells Job that he should not fail to accept the correction because of the greatness of the ransom, he implies that the loss of all of Job's possessions and family might be such a ransom for his deliverance. Dang. He implies that the loss of all of Job's possessions and family might be such a ransom. When Elihu tells Job that he should not fail to accept the correction because of the greatness of the ransom. So that's what he's saying right here, 26 to 28. Then man prays to God and he accepts him. He sees his face with a shout of joy, and he restores to his man his righteousness. He sings before man and says, I sinned and perverted what was right, and it was not repaid to me. He has redeemed my soul from going down to the pit, and my life shall look upon his right. So he's saying that he lost all the things he lost as a ransom for the correction that God is trying to give to him. Wow. He's a bold man. All right, moving on to 34. Elihu asserts God's justice, chapter 34. Some extra content. An appeal to the wise. Elihu sets out to dispute Job in a speech structured by his general statements of address. He is calling wise man to hear Job's contention that he is in the right, and men of understanding to hear Elihu's disputation of this claim, with both groups bracketed together as those who will agree with Elihu against Job. All right, Elihu asserts God's justice, chapter 34. Then Elihu answered and said, Hear my words, you wise men, and give ear to me, you who know. For the ear tests words and the palate tastes food. Let us choose what is right. Let us know among ourselves what is good. For Job has said, I am in the right, and God has taken away my right. In spite of my right, I have counted a liar. My wound is incurable, though I am without transgression. One man is like Job, who drinks up scoffing like water, who travels in company with evildoers and walks with wicked men. For he has said, it profits a man nothing that he should take delight in God. For he said, it profits a man nothing that he should take delight in God. So using Job's words against him, maybe taking him out of context, Job was saying that probably in an ironic or sarcastic sense, probably also in a place of feeling defeated and downtrodden in that moment. Right? But like the court of law says, what you said can be used against you, can and will be used against you. So he's acting like that right now. Verse 10, therefore hear me, you men of understanding. Far be it from God that he should do wickedness, and from the Almighty that he should do wrong. Again, I'll continue to say with the friends and now Elihu, out of context, what he's saying is good stuff. Some of these things, out of context. 11. For according to the work of a man, he will repay him, and according to his ways, he will make it befall him. Of a truth, God will not do wickedly, and the Almighty will not pervert justice. Who gave him charge over the earth, and who laid on him the whole world? If he should set his heart to it, and gather to himself his spirit and his breath, all flesh would perish together, and man would return to dust. If you have understanding, hear this. Listen to what I say. Shall one who hates justice govern? Will you condemn him who is righteous and mighty? Who says to a king, worthless one, and to nobles, wicked man? Who shows no partiality to princes, nor regards the rich more than the poor, for they all work in his hands? In a moment they die. At midnight the people are shaken and pass away, and the mighty are taken away by no human hand, but by God. That's good stuff. Again, out of context, good stuff. So again, like his friends, they know wise things. They can speak on wise things that they've heard and whatnot. But to live in wisdom is a different thing. And these guys are showing the difference between the two. It's one thing to know, right? You're supposed to pursue knowledge and understanding, but wisdom is the application of that understanding. Hmm. Let's get some context here. Verse 1 through 9. Elihu calls to those who are wise to weigh Job's claim that he is right and that God is taking away what he was entitled to. He prefigures his conclusion when he says that Job walks with wicked men. 3. Palate tastes food. Truth is discerned through hearing, just as the quality of food is discerned through tasting. Job used his prime proverb earlier to challenge the wisdom of his friends. Elihu repeats the proverb to challenge his listeners to weigh Job's words. 4 through 6. With a repeated reference to right in the verses, Elihu seems to be playing particularly off Job's statements in 27 2 to 6, where he lamented that God has taken his right away and refused to agree that his friends were right about him. Verse 8. Elihu described Job as one who walks with evildoers and wicked men, which is a path that the wise are called to avoid. He will ground this description in what he feels Job's assertion about himself and God necessarily means. Verse 9. Although Job has stated that the wicked and the righteous seem to suffer the same fate, in order to argue against his friend's suggestion that the wicked are always punished, he did not state precisely what Elihu presents here. Job had governed his life by delight in God and his words, and he had argued that it was the wicked who live, often in prosperity, as if service to the Almighty profits a man nothing. 34, 10 through 17. Although Elihu has already indicated his conclusion about Job, he sets out to prove that Job should be condemned for his claims. 10 through 12. These verses represent the grounds for Elihu's argument against Job, since God will repay a man in accord with his works and ways. Job's claim that he is right and that God has taken away his right would be the same as saying that God has acted in wickedness so as to pervert justice. Although it takes a slightly different shape, Elihu's argument results in the same dilemma that resulted from the argument of his three friends. Either Job is in the right or God is in the right, but it cannot be both. Ooh, that's what his claim is. Right? 23. God has no need to consider a man further. I don't think I've gotten that far. Let me finish the rest of this page. Verse 21. For his eyes are on the ways of a man, and he sees all his steps. There's no gleam or deep darkness where evildoers may hide themselves. Job said the same thing as far as the steps go. And all this. For God has no need to consider a man further, that he should go before God in judgment. So he's saying that Job doesn't deserve an audience? Is that what he's saying? For God has no need to consider a man further, that he should go before God in judgment. He shatters the mighty without investigation and sets others in their place. Thus, knowing their works, he overturns them in the night, and they are crushed. He strikes them for their wickedness in a place for all to see. Because they turned aside from following him and had no regret for any of his ways, so that they caused the cry of the poor to come to him, and he heard the cry of the afflicted. When he is quiet, who can condemn? When he hides his face, who can behold him? Whether it be a nation or a man. For a godless man should not reign, that he should not ensnare the people. I'm just going to keep reading here. 31. Or has anyone said to God, I have borne punishment, I will not offend anymore? Teach me what I do not see. If I have done iniquity, I will do it no more. Will he then make repayment to suit you because you reject it? For you may choose and not I. Therefore declare what you know. Man of understanding will say to me, and the wise who hears me will say, Job speaks without knowledge, his words are without insight. Would that Job were tried to the end, because he answers like a wicked man. Hmm. This is a guy who said, I'm not my pressure, you won't have to fear my words, and my pressure ain't gonna be that heavy. I mean, not that his words are much more heavy than his friends, but they're not really any better. If I'm Job, I'm beyond tired at this point. I'm like, Eliu, I would. That's why if I'm Job, he's probably just not even speaking anymore. He's like, there's no point responding to these people. 34 to 37. Let me read 37 real fast. Okay, that's the last verse before 35. For he adds rebellion to his sin. He claps his hands among us and multiplies his words against God. I feel like with Elihu, I'm just gonna have to read through unless he says something like really wise, out of context. A lot of what he's saying is just further dumping onto Job, you know. Let's see where am I? I'm at 20. 23. God has no need to consider a man further. The subject of this sentence is he in Hebrew, and just whom that refers to must be inferred from the context. Some interpreters suggest that it refers to man. What? Yeah, that's what it sounds like to me. First to man. With the sense that a person does not set his own times for judgment, which would require a slight emendation of the Hebrew text. However, understanding God as the subject makes sense of the context of Elihu's dispute. Job has been calling for some opportunity to represent or to present his case before either God or an arbiter, but Elihu suggests that God has already acted and does not need to give further consideration to Job's or any other person's case. And again, who is Elihu to say? These people are bold. Verse 26 to 28. Although Elihu does not apply the images directly to Job, his description suggests something very similar to what the three friends had already argued. Job has been struck for all to see, because he must have turned aside from following the Lord's ways by mistreating the poor and afflicted. Right? Just saying the same thing. Like he didn't listen to what Job was saying earlier for all the things he has done for people. 34 to 37. Elihu concludes with the presumption that any who are truly men of understanding or wise would agree with him, that Job speaks like a fool who is without knowledge or insight. Furthermore, Elihu wishes boldly that the judgment signified in Job's suffering would be taken to his logical end, because in addition to whatever sin he is ultimately being punished for, Job's words also express rebellion and arrogance against God. I think what Elihu is representing so far in this whole story, that I've been saying that sometimes it's the closest people to you who try to smite you, not on purpose, but they just end up doing it. Elihu is not considered a friend to Job, but he's saying the same things. So Elihu represents the outer crowd, like the people who are not your close friends, your friends, family, people you consider close to you. How similar they become when you go through a hard situation. How these people, close or not, can sound like the same people. Elihu's saying, really, he's not saying anything much different. He's assuming things. He's using Job's words against him. He's speaking falsely. He's giving himself some sort of self righteous high horse position of judge and adjudicator. Like he can do all these things. It's more of the same. Moving on, chapter 35, extra content. What right does Job have before God? Okay. So he's going to dig deeper into Job. Great. just like his friends. Elihu argues against what he sees as Job's presumption before God, where Job said that the wicked and the righteous appear to suffer indiscriminately. Elihu argues that Job is acting as if his righteousness grants him some expectation of favor before God, when neither faithfulness nor wickedness accomplishes anything with or against God. Furthermore, where Job had maintained that the oppressed cry out and the wicked are not punished, Elihu argues that they often cry out in pride rather than prayer for God, and thus God does not regard their cries, much less Job's vain requests and foolish words. Okay. Strong points. Strong points. Chapter 35. Do you think this to be just? Do you say, it is my right before God, that you ask, what advantage have I? How am I better off than if I had sinned? I will answer you and your friends with you. Look at the heavens and see, and behold the clouds which are higher than you. If you have sinned, what do you accomplish against him? And if your transgressions are multiplied, what do you do to him? If you are righteous, what do you give to him? Or what does he receive from your hand? Your wickedness concerns a man like yourself, and your righteousness a son of man. Because of the multitude of oppressions, people cry out. They call for help because of the arm of the mighty. But none says, where is God my maker, who gives songs in the night, who teaches us more than the beasts of the earth, and makes us wiser than the birds in the heavens. There they cry out, but he does not answer, because of the pride of evil men. Surely God does not hear an empty cry, nor does the Almighty regard it. How much less would you say that you do not see him? That the case is before him and you are waiting for him. And now, because his anger does not punish, and he does not take much note of transgression, Job opens his mouth in empty talk. He multiplies his words without knowledge. Wow. Okay. Extra content, verse 2. My right before God. Job was declaring himself right before God. He asserted that God had wronged him, which in the view of Elihu amounted to claiming that he was right rather than God. Verse 6 to 8, Elihu repeats an aspect of Eliphaz's final argument against Job, that God does not profit from Job's righteousness. However, where Elihu merely mentions wickedness within his comparison, Eliphaz detailed the likely specifics of Job's evil. Neither Eliphaz nor Elihu understand that the whole impetus for Job's complaint is his desire to see God vindicated on earth in and through the lives of those who are faithful to him. Hmm. 12:13. When Elihu says that God does not heed the cry of the oppressed because of the pride of the evil men, he does not explicitly indicate whether he is referring to those who cry out to the oppressors. However, Elihu's repeated emphasis that God does not answer, listen, hear, or regard an empty cry indicates that he is most likely referring to the pride of the oppressed. 14 to 16. Elihu argues that if God does not regard the cries of the proud oppressed, how can Job expect an answer? Verse 14, and to what Elihu assumes is the even more absent stance of one who takes his own lack of punishment as reason to speak foolishly. This is extraordinarily insensitive considering Job's actual situation. Elihu is revealing a high view of his own importance. Ooh, that's what I'm talking about. Where y'all coming from with this uppity righteousness that y'all feel for y'allself? This self-righteous behavior. Man, if I'm Job, I'm on fire, bro. I'm like, who are y'all talking to? Chapter 36. Okay. Moving on. Chapter 36, extra content here. Excuse me. 36 to 37. The mercy and majesty of God. Elihu concludes with a lengthy speech, my son here, with a lengthy speech that he introduces as being on God's behalf. What Elihu Elihu concludes with a lengthy speech that he introduces as being on God's behalf. He begins by inferring that Job's situation is an example of God using affliction to deliver the righteous from their sin if they are willing to accept his correction. Same thing his friends are saying. Again, he's saying nothing different. Elihu then describes God's power and majesty as manifested audibly and visibly in storms, through which God accomplishes whatever purpose he has in his mind. Again, the same thing his friends are saying. That his power and majesty and pretty much our understanding of God will always show visibly, and that's just not true. Again, he's not saying nothing different. Finally, he calls Job to consider whether he knows how God does any of these things. To remind him of God's majesty and power. Oh, he gonna remind him, okay? The reason both that men fear God and that he does not regard those who do not fear him. So he gonna teach him, huh? Woo, 36, here we go. Bear with me a little, and I will show you. For I have yet something to say on God's behalf. I will get my knowledge from afar and ascribe righteousness to my Maker. For truly my words are not false, and one whose perfect knowledge is with you. Oh, woo wee. He would, I mean, if he didn't lose me already. He said, for truly my words are not false. One who is perfect in knowledge is with you. I hope that's not saying that he himself, Elihu, is saying that he is perfect in knowledge. Because that is bold. That is bold, bold, bold. Wow. Verse 5. Behold, God is mighty and does not despise any. He is mighty in strength and in strength of understanding. Again, that verse in itself is a bar. That's true. That within itself is a bar. That verse. But moving on. He does not keep the wicked alive, but gives the afflicted their right. He does not withdraw his eyes from the righteous, but with kings on the throne, he sets them forever, and they are exalted. And if they are bound in chains and caught in the cords of affliction, and he declares to them their work and their transgressions, that they are behaving arrogantly. He opens their eyes to instruction and commands that they return their iniquity. If they listen and serve him, they complete their days in prosperity, and their years in pleasantness. If they do not listen, they perish by the sword and die without knowledge. 13. The godless in heart cherish anger. They do not cry for help when he binds them. They die in youth, and their life ends among the cult prostitutes. He delivers the afflicted by their affliction and opens their ear by adversity. He also allured you out of distress into a broad place where there can be no cramping, and what was set on your table was full of fatness. Man, these people love to talk, man. I'll tell you that. They love to speak. They love to hear themselves. Let's go back to some extra content. Verse 2 to 4, chapter 36. Elihu presents his final speech as something offered on God's behalf, emphasizing that, unlike Job, he has understanding that comes from outside himself, and that he is perfect in knowledge, something he will later ascribe to God. Again, he seems more arrogant than he realizes, as young men sometimes do. Yeah, he's speaking like a young guy for sure. Like he's just saying stuff. It's like, oh, if I'm Job, I'm not taking this man serious. I was giving this guy a lot of grace. And I had faith in him at first. I was like, okay, what do you got to say? Let me down immediately. 5 to 21, which I have not finished. Let me read through 21. So it says, table of fatness. But you are full of the judgment on the wicked. Judgment and justice seize you. Beware lest wrath entice you into scoffing, and let not the greatness of the ransom turn you aside. Will your cry for help avail to keep you from distress, or all the force of your strength? Do not long for the night when peoples vanish in your place. Take care, do not turn to iniquity, for this you have chosen rather than affliction. Elihu represents that guy. He thinks he is so righteous in the way he talks. I'm not gonna lie, people like that annoy me. Or they speak with such an uppity tone. Like he started off, he's the opposite of Eliphaz, where Eliphaz was trying to, butter up Job first and say good things that he's done and then give it nicely. Elihu speaks in a place where he's like, let me teach you something. I know I'm younger than you, but I have perfect knowledge and perfect wisdom. Let me teach you something. I know the answers. These three friends of yours, they said what they said, and I'm angry because they didn't say the right things, but I know. I know. Yeah, his arrogance is the force of arrogance is strong within him, man. He would be irritating me. He wouldn't upset me like my friends because they're not my friends. But this guy, I would just be irritated. I would just be listening. I'm like, honestly, I would have cut him off a long time ago. I'm like, stop talking. Talk to somebody else. Talk to somebody else, man. Chapter 5 to 21. Elihu begins by describing God's power and wisdom and asserts that he governs justly over the lives of both the wicked and the righteous. The section is focused on affliction, which God uses to deliver the righteous from their sin unless they reject his correction and show themselves to be like the godless. Elihu appeals to Job to consider his own circumstances as an example of this choice and encourages him to embrace the mercy of his affliction rather than his iniquity. 6 through 7. The statement that God gives the afflicted their right comes directly between the mention of the wicked and the righteous, expressing the heart of Elihu's argument. The afflicted are treated justly by God and reveal the state of their heart by how they respond to affliction. 8 through 15. Elihu describes affliction using the language of captivity. People are bound in chains and caught in the cords because God binds them. He argues that God uses this captivity of affliction to speak to people about their sin and opens their sin to his correction. Those who listen will be delivered by God. Those who do not listen will be judged even in the circumstances of their death. Let me take this cord out. This is all their death. Okay. Verse 10. When he states that God opens the ears, Elihu is continuing his point from an earlier speech, suggesting ways that God has been speaking and that Job may be failing to listen. Elihu describes those who hold on to their anger rather than crying out when God binds them through affliction. He does so now to warn that Job's continued complaint could lead him to a state and end like that of the godless in heart. Because clearly this man Elihu is not listening to Job. Job is actually speaking many great things about God. But he does have his frustrations, which his frustrations have only been angered and further irritated by his friends. And now you, Elihu, despite all that he's going through and all the beratement that he's receiving from you, Elihu, and Job's friends, he still speaks great things about God. So no, he's not going to end up in that state. Because despite it all, he says beautiful things. 16 through 21. Elihu addresses Job more directly by describing the change in his circumstances and warns him against choosing his iniquity rather than embracing the purpose of his affliction. These people are insane, if anything else. 16 through 17. Elihu refers to the change in Job's circumstances with the wordplay on the description of when his table was full of fatness, an example of prosperity, and how he is now full of the judgment of the wicked, calamity and distress. Just as Elihu has already referred to affliction with the imagery of captivity, he suggests quite plainly that Job should see his own suffering as God seizing him in judgment and justice, as God seizing him. Verse 18. Elihu has already alluded to the possibility of a ransom. Here he makes it explicit. Job should consider the greatness of the loss of his family, his reputation, and all that belonged to his household as the means by which the Lord is arresting his attention and turning him from sin. Right now, I'm going through a lot. The moment you start mentioning my family and stuff, we gonna be having a different sort of conversation. You know what I'm saying? Especially the family that just died. We're gonna be having a different sort of conversation. You keep mentioning them. Okay, so now extra content. Chapter 36:22 to verse to chapter 37:13. All right, so moving on into chapter 37, but before we get there, having described how God speaks through affliction, Elihu focuses now on the majestic and searchable ways of God and the way in which his majesty is partially revealed in his governing of the power and purposes of storms. The speech is structured by the calls to the hearer/reader to see. And here, keep listening, what Elihu is describing, further implying that Job is simply not attending to the places where God is actually speaking. All right, so let's continue down to 37. Still on 36:24. Remember to extol his works of which men have sung. All mankind has looked on it. Man beholds it from afar. Behold, God is great, and we know him not. The number of his years are unsearchable. For he, and this is all true, but I'm just gonna keep going because Elihu is irritating. For he draws up the drops of water; they distill his mist and rain. It's like almost all these wise things he's saying coming from Elihu's mouth. It's not that they don't mean anything, but if I was listening to Elihu speak to my face, I would take the understanding that like, okay, there's stuff he's saying that is true, but I wouldn't give his words any more weight. Like again, when he's done talking, I probably would just leave if I'm even still listening. For he draws up the water, he draws up the drops of water. They distill his mist and rain, which the skies pour down and drop on mankind abundantly. Can anyone understand the spreading of the clouds, the thunderings of his pavilion? Behold, he scatters his lightning about him, and covers the roots of the sea. For by these he judges people. He gives food in abundance. He covers his hands with the lightning, and commands it to strike the mark. It crashes. Its crashing declares his presence, and the cattle also declare that he rises. Further content before getting into 37. 36:30. He scatters his lightning. The lightning of the storm represents God's glory in it. His glory lights up even the depths of the sea. 31. He judges people. Judging and nourishing are often parallel aspects of God's provision. The clouds bear God's throne from which he governs the feet and feeds his people. 32. Covers his hands. Hands may be a way of describing the great arches or vaulted chamber of heaven filled with God's light. Okay. 37. Continuing. Elihu proclaims God's majesty. 37. At this also my heart trembles and leaps out of its place. Keep listening to the thunder of his voice and the rumbling of the rolling that comes from his mouth. The rumbling that comes from his mouth. It says 2 to 5. So let me finish to 5. Under the whole heaven he lets it go, and his lightning to the corners of the earth. After it his voice roars. He thunders with his majestic voice, and he does not restrain the lightnings when his voice is heard. God thunders wondrously with his voice. He does great things that we cannot comprehend. See, I'll highlight that. Does that make sense? Or I mean, that's great to know, and he definitely does. All right, so extra content 2 to 5. Elihu makes repeated reference to God's voice in connection with both the audible thunder and visible lightning manifestations of a storm, through which God communicates something of his majesty. Okay. Let me continue. Verse 6. For to the snow he says, fall on the earth, likewise to the downpour, his mighty downpour. He seals up the hand of every man. that all men whom he made may know it. Then the beasts go into the liars and remain in their dens. For its chamber comes in the whirlwind and cold from the scattering winds. By the breath of God ice is given, and the broad waters are frozen fast. He loads the thick cloud with moisture. The clouds scatter his lightning. They turn around and around by his guidance, to accomplish all that he commands them. In the face of the habitable world, whether for correction of his land or for his love, he causes it to happen. 14. Hear this, O Job. Stop and consider the wondrous works of God. Do you know how God lays his command upon them and causes the lightning of his cloud to shine? Do you know the balances of the clouds, the wondrous works of him who is perfect in knowledge? Whose garments are hot when the earth is still because of the south wind? Can you, like him, spread out the skies, hard as the cast metal mirror? Teach us what we shall say to him. We cannot draw up our cases because of darkness. Shall it be told that I would speak? Did a man ever wish that he would be swallowed up? 21. And now no one looks at the light when it is bright in the skies, when the wind has passed and it cleared him. Out of the north comes golden splendor. God is clothed with awesome majesty. The Almighty, we cannot find him. He is great in power. Justice and abundant righteousness he will not violate. And 24, therefore men fear him. He does not regard any who are wise in their own conceit. Who are wise in their own conceit. And it is really crazy that he said all that. Just for the very end to say God does not regard any who are wise to their own conceit. Says Elihu, ironically. Okay, I think that's the last thing he says. So let's finish off here. Extra content, verse 7. He seals up the hand of every man. This probably refers to the way severe weather causes people to take shelter, as the animals do, and thus prevents them from working. 13. God's providential purposes may relate to people, correction, or love, or may be for his land. 14 through 20. Elihu focuses on God's majesty and calls on Job to listen. Hear this, O Job, and apply the weight of the description to his complaint before God, just as he has called Job to do in relation to affliction. Verse 16. Elihu refers to God as one who is perfect in knowledge, a description he first applied to himself in offering to his speech in God's behalf. So you're going to give us a description you give to God, you're going to give it to yourself, especially being perfect in something. Arrogance. 21 through 23. Elihu likens the light that comes after a storm has cleared to the God who is clothed with awesome majesty, who cannot simply be found, who is extremely powerful, and who does not violate what is right. Verse 24. Elihu presents the options of responding to God's majesty in two stark categories. Either people are wise and exhibit fear of God, or they are wise in their own heart. Whew. All right. I'm glad that's done because, wow, that was a whole bunch of nothing. You know when somebody says a lot of stuff, but they don't say anything at all? That's what Elihu just represented. I mean, it might be a difference of speaking on punishment over correction. His three friends were speaking on punishment. Elihu was speaking on correction. But they're all saying the same thing. It's just this overassumption, this self-righteous, high horse opinion that they have of their own selves, that they feel that they have the right to be the judge and adjudicator of what Job is going through. Whew. Okay, I'm positively and truly glad that they're done speaking. I think that's it. Because next, which will be the next live, because I'm not doing this now because my tongue is getting tired. And also I want to be able to make a separate live for the upcoming section, which is going to be God now speaking. God is now going to respond to Job. What we all been kind of waiting for, honestly, right? And I can almost imagine now, I can already see now the next live is going to be this actual washing, actual cleansing of what Job needs and what you and I need when we are in the midst of scrutiny and judgment from our peers, from people we don't know, or even our own questions that we have to God. So I can already see chapter 38 says, the Lord answers Job. So we'll get into that. 39 is more the same. And in 40 is a little bit of a dialogue between God and Job. Right. And 41 is more of that. And then 42 is going to be Job's confession and repentance. And he actually does repent, but he only repents when God speaks to him, right? So we're going to get into all that, and that's going to conclude Job in the next live. So, thank you for being here. Honestly, just my final thoughts, reading through the friends and through Elihu, through Elsbath, or Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, and Elihu here. This was much of a trial getting through all this, and especially reading from Job's perspective. I think Job is trying in a way that I see why more people don't go over Job, the book of Job. It's a book that is truly it's forgotten because it doesn't have all the miracles and wonders and things like that. It's just a real honest dialogue. Job is an honest dialogue between people and people's interpretation of God, representation of God, and questions towards God. I see why Job is kind of ignored or cast aside. It's almost too relevant. And it's not, again, it's not colorful. It's not, it doesn't have Genesis, which is the beginning of all things and the creation of humanity and all the drama that fills with that. It's not the Gospels in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and James, the actual words of Jesus Christ, right? It's not the prophetic words of Isaiah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Daniel, right? It's not the words and wisdoms of Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, right? It's not all the amazing letters and teachings of Paul, from Acts all the way to what his last one, Timothy or Titus, probably Timothy or whatever his last ones are that he wrote. All the shins, Corinthians, Ephesians, Galatians, Philippians, right? There's all these different colors with these other books, and Job is kind of just this relevant and relatable scrutiny and beating that on an everyday basis when it comes to the sufferings that we face. Sometimes the lack of comfort, though in good intentions, the lack of comfort we get from our friends. And the thing is, we sometimes are the ones, we're the perpetrators of this wanting to put down comfort, but just further irritating somebody's pain and suffering. Or we've been on the Job end of wanting comfort and just receiving harshness, right? This over righteous attitude. So I can see why Job is ignored. Anyways, the next live is going to conclude Job. We're going to hear the words of God as he responds to Job, and then Job's final words and repentance of the matter. So that being said, thank y'all for being here. See y'all next time. Shalom.